All right. Welcome to the September 1st work group for light duty vehicle purchase incentives. My name is Aaron Hilliard, and I'm the manager over the Clean Cars for All program at the California Air Resources Board. I'd like to kick off today's work group with a few remarks. First, some housekeeping stuff. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We anticipate a copy of the recording will be made available on the Low Carbon Transportation Investments and Air Quality Improvement Program Meetings and Workshops webpage in approximately 2 weeks. Materials for today's work group are available on the same webpage, and a link to these materials has been dropped in the Zoom chat. In addition, we will be leveraging Zoom's raised hand feature to facilitate comments and questions. Please remember to state your name and affiliation when making a comment or asking a question. We ask that you hold your questions until the discussion period toward the end of each presentation today. If there are Zoom disruptions for any reason, including malicious intent, we will immediately end today's meeting and send out another notice to reschedule. We are unable to allow anonymous meeting participants for security reasons. Please make sure your name is clear on the Zoom platform. If you have called in, we will adjust your phone number and call on you if you raise your hand based on the last 4 digits of your number. And lastly, if you are a member of the media, we ask that you please submit all questions through our Office of Communications at comms@arb.ca.gov. Please note that the Q&A box is not active for today's work group due to disruptive use by some participants in prior public meetings. We ask that participants with questions or comments please use the Zoom raise hand feature as mentioned. Given the amount of material on the agenda today, we ask that participants keep their comments and questions as brief as possible, with the understanding that there will be an additional opportunity to comment on anything presented today at the September 8th Funding Plan Workshop next week. Finally, I'd like to make a few remarks about today's material. Staff have been working diligently over the last few weeks to prepare proposals that are responsive to stakeholder input and based on the expectation of a large allocation to support light-duty incentives across the board. This week, when the budget was released, we received significantly less funding than expected. The budget includes $255 million in the general fund, including $125 million for statewide expansion of Clean Cars for All, a minimum of $80 million for district Clean Cars for All programs, and $10 million for the establishment of the Zero Emission Assurance Program. There is an additional $126 million from the general fund. Keeping that in mind, staff still feel the proposal is timely. And again, we look forward to comments from stakeholders today and at next week's workshop. Now for the agenda. Today's work group, we will be presenting material related to the Assembly Bill 630 report for the Clean Cars for All program, vehicle affordability analysis, prepaid charging card incentive analysis, draft proposal for incentive amount increases, and a needs-based model for equity-focused vehicle purchase incentive programs. It looks like we have a raised hand.
Thanks, Aaron. Maria Ruiz, I've unmuted your mic.
That was on accident.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so with that, then we'll have with that, I'll pass over to my colleague Tiffany Nguyen, who will do the presentation for the AB630 report. Tiffany?
Yes. Thank you, Aaron. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tiffany Nguyen, and I'm a staff member at the Clean Cars for All, or CC4A team. I will be going over the annual evaluation and goal setting report, also known as the AB630 report. The AB630 report requires CARB to analyze program performance and to set new quantifiable goals for the upcoming fiscal year. Beginning with fiscal year 2022-2023, the report is developed as part of the funding plan process. This allows additional opportunities for stakeholders to provide input, both in the development of the report itself, as well as guiding the direction of the CC4A program. As a program update, the AB630 report has been combined to cover both fiscal year 2021-2022 and fiscal years 2022 and 2023, and will be released as an appendix to this year's funding plan. In terms of program status, $190 million has been allocated, with fiscal years 2021 and 2022 seeing an allocation of $75 million. CC4A has funded over 12,000 vehicle replacement projects in all district programs, with the exception of San Joaquin's. Air pollution control districts are still currently open. San Diego's CC4A program is up and coming. CARB utilizes the AB630 report to showcase program achievements, identify areas of improvement, and informs the long-term outlook and direction of the CC4A program using data-driven goal setting. It also serves as a supplement in other long-term plans, such as the 3-year plan for zero-emission vehicle incentives, and will be a document to assist in guiding statewide expansion. CARB works closely with participating air districts to develop this report. This coordination with the district provides CARB with the on-the-ground knowledge about implementation and program operation experience, as well as analyzing metrics such as completed projects, application volumes, and other capacity factors. CARB would like to expand on these metrics to include stakeholder and community input and any additional factors that should be discussed in this report to fully ensure that the program benefits its participants, with special considerations taken in evaluating participant feedback and survey results. Throughout the implementation of Clean Cars for All, it was identified that surveys were long, open-ended, generated data that was difficult to analyze, and that the data was especially lacking in areas pertaining to demographics. Districts have also noted that participation rates have been low. CARB is developing new and improved surveys, as well as improving survey collection methodology to increase participation. This proposed survey collection process has a few changes from the initial collection effort that was first implemented. The collection process has evolved to include elements such as multiple touchpoints to interact with participants and customization for implementing air districts, as CARB understands that this is not a one-size-fits-all model. Additionally, in response to stakeholder feedback, as well as the California State Auditor's report, the surveys will require the collection of demographic data such as race, gender, and ethnicity, as well as socioeconomic data such as job opportunities and other co-benefits of the program. These surveys aim to be short and succinct and will be utilized to increase targeted outreach of priority populations and continual fine-tuning of the program. As mentioned on the previous slide, one of the improvements to the survey collection process is that there will be multiple opportunities to survey and interact with participants. This allows for participants to share information and data regarding their satisfaction with the overall program to CARB and implementing air districts at multiple stages in the process. The timing can be broken down to 3 stages: first contact, purchase decision, and follow-up. During the first contact stage, the survey aims to collect basic demographic data such as race, ethnicity, and gender, as well as how have they heard about the program and their contact information. This will provide insight to the applicant pool who may be unable to continue forward later on in the process. In the purchase decision stage, participants who have applied to the program will fall into one of 3 categories: those who end the program before approval, those who end the program after approval, and those who have successfully completed the program. To those who end the program before approval, the survey aims to catalog why the participants did or did not complete the application. This serves to assist CARB in identifying any potential burdens of documentation that are placed on the participant or other barriers to successful participation. To those who end the program after approval, the survey aims to catalog and identify obstacles as to why they did not buy or lease to the program. This serves to assist CARB in identifying factors such as market conditions and interest in vehicle types. To those who have completed the transaction, the respective survey will assist CARB to understand what was difficult in the process, dealership interactions, and suggestions for the program. The surveys administered during the 12, 24, and 30-month follow-up will collect basic information of the vehicle, and if the vehicle is able to meet their needs, overall reliability of the vehicle, and if any job opportunities have opened as a result of the program. Using these new surveys, quantifiable metrics, and data-driven goal setting as a cornerstone, CARB has developed and proposes to use the following guiding principles for future funding allocations. These principles will guide CARB in building a formula that will bring transparency to the funding of CC4A programs. CARB will establish that consistent, predictable funding is made available, use data-based metrics to determine program capacity and predict future growth, and would also strive to account for current and future market conditions. In conjunction with conducting these analyses on these quantifiable goals, CARB will continuously solicit public input on appropriate metrics to promote flexibilities and fine-tuning when needed. With these proposed guiding principles in mind, CARB proposes developing a program allocation formula. The allocations will begin with a baseline allocation split between the AIR districts, followed by an additional allocation for programs who have exceeded 1,000 projects in a 12-month period. All other remaining funds will then be split based on an average percentage of each program's share on the following: eligible population, which are based on zip codes, vehicle populations beginning with model years 1990 to 2007, poverty populations, the populations of those less than 200% of the federal poverty level, and disadvantaged or DAC populations. The eligible poverty and DAC population data will be taken from Cal EnviroScreen 4.0, while the vehicle population data will be captured from the DMV. Please do keep in mind that this is a proposal and that CARB is soliciting feedback. This proposal is not permanent, and this material will be revisited again during the funding plan workshop that is scheduled for September 8th. With that, we will move on to our next steps specifically for CC4A. Future public meetings will be scheduled to provide updates for the solicitation for the statewide program. The solicitation with the Clean Vehicle Assistance Program, also known as CVAP, is pending and dates have yet to be determined. CARB will also continue to meet with the districts to discuss data and metrics for the annual report, as well as any other additional items for consideration that were brought up in this work group. With that, I will open it up for questions and comments from our attendees. Please use the raise hand function if you would like to ask a question or make a comment. If you're calling in by phone, please press #2. Please state your name and affiliation before asking a question or making a comment.
We have one raised hand. Christopher Chavez, I've unmuted your mic.
Yeah, thank you for this information. I think just as a general comment, one thing I would certainly encourage with the AB630 report and just generally as a practice, I know that there's, later on we're going to discuss some changes to the different programs that are, could be coming up soon. Just really keeping a close tab and keep close eye on the percentage of funds going to disadvantaged communities, and making sure that those areas still are certainly meeting the 1550 requirements, but exceeding that as well. Just again to keep an eye on that as the pool of participants expands. There's going to be some drop off in that amount, but trying to maximize that as much as possible and keeping an idea of where that funding is at, I think is going to be very important. So just want to put that out there, and thank you for this part of the presentation.
Thank you for your comment, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Just as a reminder to people, please state your name and affiliation before starting your question or comment. Next up, we have Tin Lee. Tin, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi, my name is Tin Lee. I'm from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and I work on the Bay Area's Clean Cars for All program. I just have a comment about the survey collection. I think it's great that we're starting to look at more ways to collect data and get a better understanding of the experience that our grantees and applicants are going through. I do have a concern though, which is the volume of the surveys. It looks like we're increasing the number of surveys for the purchase decision, I'm just a little worried about maybe the quantity of that and like survey fatigue, where we may be overwhelming our grantees a little bit too much with a lot of surveys. So maybe just keep that in mind as you think about the development of those surveys. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Next up, we have Roman. Roman, I've unmuted your mic.
Thanks, Aria. This is Roman Partia Lopez with the Greenlining Institute. Thank you for that overview. And I apologize because I showed up a couple minutes late, but I'm looking really quickly at the presentation. And I'm just curious if you can elaborate on any lessons learned from the initial program evaluation that you all were able to garner from the analysis that you did. And then I'm just curious about the process and whether this was just like an internal CARB analysis, or did it also include engaging the air districts, getting information from them? And I raised that because, Tim just from Bay Area AQMD just talked about a concern that he has. And I'm just curious of how deeply the air districts and the program administrators were engaged in the development of this initial report.
Thanks, Roman. So on the process, generally, in terms of the goal setting for the AB630, districts are engaged. We meet with them, provide data, any lessons learned. There's multiple opportunities for the districts to inform that goal setting part. In terms of the surveys, we are looking at some of the requirements from the CS California State Auditors report, noting the absence of data metrics to inform decisions in the program. So a lot of that is driven from those recommendations, as well as the lack of data that we have received from the districts. So looking back at Tim's comment, I think there is an opportunity for us to refine the process. But we've also, very much heard from community members wanting to see the demographic data. And so that is something that we really, really want to ensure that we're getting. Additionally, in terms of lessons learned, we've seen a low participation, in the 12, 24, and 30-month surveys. So we think it's important that we have at least a couple more touch points to collect data ahead of time before someone gets the incentive. And again, there's opportunities for us to refine that process, but looking at comments we received from community members, noting the lack of specifically demographic data, the recommendations with the CSA audit, we really, really, really need to get data to inform, the guidelines for this program. I hope that, again, outreach gaps, funding gaps, we're looking to really use that data to better target, again, we mentioned allocations. Where is the money needed? Who is not receiving, which communities do we need to increase outreach in? And so again, to Tim's point and your point about working with the districts, there's still opportunity. There's ongoing opportunity. I mean, I guess one thing I want to highlight is that this isn't something that we see as a set and forget. This is going to be an ongoing living process in terms of refinements and making changes based on needs and comments from community members and stakeholders and their districts. So that's one of the things I wanted to highlight. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I appreciate that response. Yeah, and I see there's going to be additional public meetings to help with the metrics and the evaluation and other evaluation components. Yeah, and so I'm glad to hear that this is a kind of a iterating process that we'll be able to provide input. And so just to kind of build on that, so we'll have a public process to provide input on potential metrics that we want to see as part of this evaluation. And then will it be an annual report or biannual? Or how frequently are you going to be reporting on these metrics?
So the AB630 report is an annual is an annual requirement. With this year's report, obviously we have today, and it's going to be included as part of the funding plan. So it'll be an appendix in the funding plan. So it will be a part of that funding plan process, but it's going to be an ongoing thing because we have to do it every year.
Yeah.
So there'll be continued opportunity to comment on the process with the proposal that we put forth this today. We intend on, again, that part of this year's funding plan, and we intend on implementing that in this upcoming round of grants. But again, ongoing process. Want to make sure that we're responsive to stakeholder and particularly community input. So I would say that this is, there's continued opportunity for comment on this.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Aaron. And the last point I just want to make before I turn it back to you all is, yeah, I think if there's a way of being able to see what all of those existing metrics that y'all are looking at, that'd be really helpful to be able to process and then be able to provide additional feedback. But then thinking about some of the proposed changes that y'all are going to talk about later today, especially around the statewide clean cars for all, and a more specific focus on getting incentives into disadvantaged community census tracts. Demographic data is definitely important, and we want to be able to have that to see who's getting them, but then also tracking the percentage or dollars going into disadvantaged community census tracts. I think it'd also be really important, especially if we're going to start, if CARB is going to really start prioritizing those investments in those census tracts. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Roman.
Thank you. Next up, we have Brett Zahner. Brett, I've unmuted your mic.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. Sorry if I'm sounding congested. I'm getting over COVID, so I'm okay. I'm Brett, and I'm at the Foundation for California Community Colleges, and we are a primary administrator on behalf of South Coast Air Quality Management District for Replace Your Ride. And I just wanted to, I guess, chime in on the survey piece. And kind of echoing what Tin and Roman both said as well. But I wonder, maybe this was implied, and I just didn't get it from what was said. But when we say like initial survey or first contact, I think it would be important to think about minimizing the additional asks that we make of the participants, especially because there's the follow-up survey, and that's probably going to be the hardest one to do if we're doing like 12, 24, 30 month. And then always thinking about incentives. So always thinking about incentivizing folks to supply that kind of information. And if we're already asking people to apply, collecting data that we know doesn't change at the time of application. So collecting people's demographic information, race, ethnicity, gender, identity, etc. We collect their income information, household, their address, zip code. We get a lot of that when folks apply, not all of it, but we could get most of it when they apply, things that arguably wouldn't change much from the time they apply to when they receive their vehicle. And then I'm also wondering with which we'll talk about later, but the charge card or charger incentive EBSE, that's another touch point that we could look at to ask people questions about the purchase, because they would have already made the purchase when they're doing the charge EBSE incentive. So that's a great time while we're talking to the participant about EBSE to talk to them about their purchase. So just thinking about all the different touch points that already exist, and then working in survey and data collection into those existing touch points and not creating new ones, I think would be a really powerful strategy. And I think that a lot of this could be kind of elucidated through speaking with the different implementers of all the programs, whether that's the air districts themselves or kind of the subcontractors like us or Valley Can and Grid Alternatives and others. But I think through doing it, we definitely have that on the ground perspective. And then we are also talking to community groups and participants themselves. But I think that we could achieve the goals of quote unquote surveying without having to do additional things. So really looking at those touch points that already exist that are kind of mandatory parts of the program, so they don't feel like an extra burden on the participant. So that was my comment there. And then in terms of the allocations, I like that we heard the iterative process. And I guess I'm just wondering, has it ever been thought about what it would look like to allocate on kind of a quarterly basis or make it more flexible? I think what's interesting is to see some air districts still have funding, some don't. And I know right now only the Central Valley is paused, but we've seen at other points in time, you know, two air districts are closed, 2 are open, 1's closed, the rest are open, et cetera, and it varies. I wonder with statewide program coming on, have y'all ever thought about having the large pool of money and kind of doing these like quarterly allocations with the goal in mind of either everyone's open, everything's open, or everything's closed? Because I think that would make more sense to the residents as well. So there's not like, well, my family up in the Bay said they can get the money, but I'm down here in San Diego and we can't. It's set just for an example. So yeah, that iterative process, what does it look like maybe to put that into practice on a quarterly or other periodic basis, and really try to make it, you know, across the state, so you can have clear messaging that says like the Clean Cars for All program is on pause for the state and will open back up. And that way we don't have tons of mixed messaging, which makes it difficult to communicate and even more frustrating. And that way too, you know, you could give money to a place that's, you know, has a bit more need or demonstrated need, and being able to be flexible in how you reallocate throughout the fiscal years. So just a thought, but thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you, Brett, for that comment. On the survey stuff, I think, you know, what I was trying to get across is that we do want to balance, you know, the need for data with additional burden on applicants. One thing you'll see, you know, later in today's presentation is a proposal for increasing incentives through the program, and you know, we're hopeful that increased incentive will, you know, be enough to get consumers to fill out a survey. But I appreciate, you know, pointing out working with, you know, implementers and things. We fully intend on doing that using existing touch points. I think that fits nicely, so we appreciate that comment. On the allocation stuff, appreciate that as well. Again, all of this is a proposal, and we're happy to work with districts and communities on you know, how on the allocation stuff moving forward. A lot of the stop-start has been frustrating for us. You know, we know that there's limited funding for these programs. There's a lot of demand. The stop-start nature of the programs has been frustrating for everyone, and so we're happy to, you know, look into that and continue to work with districts on some of that. So thank you.
Next up, we have Roman. Roman, I've unmuted your mic.
Yeah, thanks, Aria. Yeah, this is Roman Partia Lopez with the Greenlining Institute. Just one additional comment I forgot to reference, and one of Brett's comments actually was what sparked it. In thinking about the report, but then the data itself, and just having that be part of a transparent process. You know, I think having a recommendation that I hope CARB, you know, implements is one that just publicly puts this data out there, that it's not just buried in a report that we have to dig through, but one that, you know, that CARB dedicates a site or something that has the data available for us to track, right? To see, to like Brett's point around how much funding is available, when are programs coming close to being out of funding, or are they out of funding? I think very similar to what CSE, Center for Sustainable Energy, has for the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project. It's a very, intuitive dashboard that has that data available, and you can see when there isn't any funding. So thinking about something like that for Clean Cars for All, or the Clean Vehicle Assistance Program, I think would be really helpful. And whether it's standalone site or merged with another, or aligned, or I mean, not aligned, but in conjunction with, like, for example, the Energy Commission and their EV chargers in California website that they have. There's the state agencies already have some of these sites available where this data could live. So thinking about how we share this data in a more public and transparent process, I think is something that we would really appreciate, and would be really helpful for the advocacy that we're doing around these programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Roman. And I hope one of the things that is coming across in this first piece of the presentation is that we want that as well. Particularly with the statewide administrator, we want the data to be available. We want there to be increased transparency. We want more metrics. So I'm really hoping that comes across in this presentation. So I appreciate that comment. Thank you.
There are no more raised hands.
Right. With that, we are going to move on to the next agenda item. My name is Raquel Leon, and I'm the CARB staff lead over the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project, or CVR. We're going to switch gears a little bit, and I'd like to introduce John Anderson with the Center for Sustainable Energy, who is the program administrator for CVRP. The Center for Sustainable Energy has been working on a vehicle affordability analysis that has helped inform staff's draft proposal for increased incentive amounts, which we'll go over later today. But first, I'd like to bring John on so he can go over the analysis. John?
Great, thanks, Raquel. Good morning, everyone. I'm John Anderson from the Center for Sustainable Energy. I'm going to share my screen here. Share slides. Is that showing up?
Yes, thanks, John.
Great, thank you. So today I'm going to be talking about vehicle affordability and choice relative to different incentive amounts. Slide here. So our goal with this work was to understand whether a mix of incentives provides meaningful choices for potential new car buyers. And we looked at vehicle ownership costs relative to income for consumers at different income levels, including incentives at different amounts, to get a sense for how much of a difference incentives, particularly larger incentives, make in providing more vehicle choice for potential consumers. The purpose of our presentation today is twofold. First, we want to present the numerous assumptions that we've made about vehicle costs and affordability to get your feedback. We want to understand what doesn't pass the smell test. What assumptions are we making that are unreasonable or unrealistic or naive? And we want to think about what we should update to make these calculations about affordability more appropriate for the California context. And second, we want to tee up some conversations we're going to have a little bit later today about future rebate amounts. A sneak peek of our conclusions: the incentives as currently designed don't provide enough money to those at lower income levels to enable a meaningful amount of choice, even with a fully stacked state incentive. And that limited choice is a bit expanded when you add in a full federal tax credit, but it still remains a bit limited at the lower income levels. So what then do incentives need to be in order to enable meaningful choice? And my plan is to step through each element of the calculations to present those assumptions, again, ask for feedback. The goal is, of course, to dial in something that's reasonable and realistic for the California context, but that don't set up consumers for potentially risky financial decisions. So making sure that we're thinking about affordability in a way that's safe in terms of making a financial decision. If something occurs to you, please remember that for the end of the presentation, where we'll take feedback, of course. Also happy to follow up after the meeting and gather any other feedback you might have. We're going to be taking notes about those things, and we welcome any feedback that you have about these calculations. So on to our cost calculations. I'll start by saying we're setting leases aside for this analysis. We've previously received feedback that leases can be problematic because people come out of their lease agreements without any equity in their vehicle. For that reason, we're concentrating on incentives as they support and enable purchase choices. In our calculations for loan costs, we're of course factoring in the principal, including taxes and fees for the vehicle and interest. And for operating costs, we're looking at insurance costs, fuel, and other maintenance costs. And that leads us to a total monthly operating cost for a vehicle purchase that we can compare to income levels to ascertain whether a vehicle is affordable. Which brings us to that affordability metric. The metric is an abridged version of a guideline that we've seen in the financial wellness world that says that when one's buying a car, one should put 20% of the cost of the car down as a down payment, enter into a 4-year loan, and spend no more than 10% of their monthly income on those monthly operating costs. We've modified this rule slightly to account for a couple of things. First, we know that it's common in California to spend more than 10% of one's income on transportation costs. We also acknowledge that we have high inflation right now, and vehicle costs and other costs of living are going up, which led us to increasing that threshold to 15%. That's still lower than some spend on vehicles in California. It can be as high as 20-30%. But again, we wanted to keep that percentage fairly low to make sure that we're thinking about incentive design relative to something that is less risky in terms of financial decisions. We've also reduced the down payment guideline from 20% to 10%. And we did that to roughly align with the grant amount for the Clean Vehicle Assistance Program, considering a down payment for a median priced vehicle in this data set that we used for this analysis. We've also looked at different household sizes and to account for differences in purchasing power at different household sizes, we've added an adjustment to account for those differences. As you add people, you don't necessarily scale up your costs scale up in addition to your income. And that happens at a different rate depending on how large the household size is. We're using an adjustment that's also used by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, for doing those household size purchase power adjustments. So onto our vehicle pool. For new vehicles, we're looking at the 2022 model year, looking at vehicles from fueleconomy.gov. Worth noting that when we're talking about vehicle choice in this analysis, we're talking about combinations of vehicle make, model, and trim level, where the trim level results in a difference in all electric range. So if a trim level adds a nicer interior, maybe some exterior features, some technology features, but doesn't change the range, that counts as a single choice. Where it does meaningfully change the range, such as adding a larger battery or different rim sizes that changes the range, that can count as multiple choices. So you'll see later on that Nissan Leaf, for example, has 3 different choices, or 2 different choices rather, and so on. We're also applying a filter to only look at vehicles that are currently eligible for CVRP. So that's under the MSRP cap for CVRP and exceeding the all electric range minimum for plug-in hybrids. And we're applying those same filters to the used vehicles, which we also analyzed a little bit later on. Which takes us on to our cost assumptions. So our new vehicle price information was gathered from manufacturer websites. We're using the model minimum manufacturer suggested retail price, MSRP. And when that's not available, we're turning to sources like Kelley Blue Book or Edmunds or publications like Car and Driver. For used vehicle prices, we're using the fair purchase price from Kelley Blue Book, KBB. For interest rates, we're setting new and used interest rates separately. Both are about 10% based on the August 2022 average for relatively high credit scores, between 700 and 750. Interest rates have gone up recently. We can dial these assumptions up or down as we expect the market to change, or in response to program requirements like those in the CVA program. And we can set those separately for both new and used vehicles. For insurance costs, we're assuming $190 per month for insurance costs, which is a national average from Forbes. That equates to about $2,280 per year. For vehicle maintenance costs, we're using $33 per month, approximately for both BEVs and PHEVs. That's a monthly average for a total vehicle life maintenance cost, as found by the 2020 Consumer Reports report about EV vehicle costs over time. There are some other possible inputs here. The Department of Energy has an April 2021 report out that has some higher costs. We can certainly dial those up or down separately for plug-in hybrids and battery electric vehicles as well. Finally, we're looking at DMV and dealership document fees and also sales tax rates for these vehicles. We're using statewide averages for vehicle fees and the tax rates, and we can set those differently depending on the local context that we might want to look at. Worth noting that what we're not including here are the dealership markups that we've been seeing across the state. Those markups can be $5,000, $10,000. We're not factoring those in, and we think that whether we include those or not depends on how quickly we anticipate a return to normalcy in terms of supply. When we think those dealership markups might disappear from the new vehicle context. For fuel costs, they vary by vehicle, and we're using the fueleconomy.gov defaults for fuel costs. And again, those purchase power adjustments were applied for larger households. So that brings us to our results. In these results, we're looking at 4 income levels. 3 of those are relative to the federal poverty level, 225, 300, and 400% of the federal poverty level. And we also included the CVRP income cap as a comparison point. So if we look at the third line here in this table, someone making 400% of the FPL in a 4-person household, that's $111,000. According to these vehicle affordability calculations, could afford a maximum monthly all-in operating cost of $694 per month. You can see that's $390 and $520 for the 225 and 300% of the federal poverty level. And at the cap, it's almost double the 400% FPL level at $1,250. And again, that's all in principal, interest, insurance, fuel, maintenance costs for the vehicle purchase. So let's dial into the 4-person, 400% FPL example a little bit more. For a 4-person household making $111,000, again, 400% FPL, looking at CVRP eligible vehicles and considering a $14,000 point of sale incentive, so a fully stacked state incentive, there's one vehicle choice available, and that's the Nissan Leaf, the 40 kilowatt hour version. I'm going to present this as a grid next. So we looked at those 4 income levels and across a number of different incentive levels between 2,000 and 21,500, which is a fully stacked state incentive plus the full federal tax credit, assuming somebody has enough tax liability to claim it, right? And we see the following. So if you add the tax credit at the 400% FPL, you enable 7 vehicle choices. At the CVRP income cap level, a $2,000 standard rebate enables 8 choices, and that scales all the way up to 27 choices if you enable, or if you provide a $21,500 incentive to someone at the cap. Let's expand this to look at PHEVs. So again, this is applying the CVRP eligibility criteria. So there are some PHEVs that are higher priced. There are also some PHEVs that are below the all electric range minimum. So there are more than 5 vehicles in the PHEV market, but we have 5 in our data set for CVRP eligible PHEVs that we looked at here. And as you can see, there are no choices at any of the incentive levels that we've looked at on the PHEV side for those making 400% or less of the federal poverty level. At the income cap, between 3 and 5 choices, depending on how large the incentive is. So we also wanted to look at used vehicles. And what we found is that the dollar for dollar incentives go further in terms of the metric enabling affordable choice in the used space. So here we're looking at the same income levels, but you'll notice that the incentive amounts are lower. And we see that particularly on the BEV side, choice starts to open up at much lower incentive levels. So at $1,000 at 225 FPL, there are 4 vehicle BEV choices available that are affordable under these calculations. If you add a $9,000 incentive, that jumps up to 46 vehicles out of 109. What we've shaded here is where 25% of the vehicles in our data set are considered affordable. So a threshold for meaningful choice, which of course is up for discussion in terms of what amount of choices is meaningful in terms of what incentives enable. But you can see here that a lot more choices available at lower income levels with a relatively smaller incentive on the used vehicle side. So revisiting those key takeaways that we talked about up front, our current incentive levels for new vehicles, looking at that 2022 model year and considering all of these assumptions that we've made about what affordability means, we find that there aren't a lot of choices available for those making 400% or less of the federal poverty level in terms of household income. We also find that incentive dollar for dollar incentive dollars go further in terms of enabling choice when they're applied to used vehicles, which makes some intuitive sense, right? We assume that used vehicles are less expensive, which, in the current market may not always be true, but assuming that those vehicles are less expensive, we would expect more options to be available to folks at lower incentive levels and lower income levels. So I'll leave it there. Happy to flip back and forth between slides here. Happy to take your feedback. I'm very grateful for your input on these things. And thanks for your attention. Much appreciated.
Good morning, everyone. You can use the raise hand feature to raise your hand. Those of you participating by phone, press pound or hashtag to raise your hand. When you're called on, please state your name and affiliation. Oh, sorry, I've been told that people cannot hear me. Can you hear me now, John?
A little bit better, still kind of faint.
Sorry, there's a fan in the background. It's really hot. So we have a raised hand, Tim Tyner. I'm gonna go ahead and unmute your mic and I'll figure out my tech issues. Excuse me.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't hear you Ari, either. I assume I'm unmuted. Tim Tyner from the Central California Asthma Collaborative. This is a cool presentation, John. I just had two quick questions. When you're showing vehicle options or the choices for a household of 4, you're considering that the house would only have one vehicle, correct? So that dollar amount you showed of $694 for the 400% FPL, that would be if that household, that's the total for all vehicles. So when you're saying that they could buy a Nissan Leaf, you're saying they could buy, that would be the only vehicle in the household?
Yeah, so for these affordable, thanks for your question, Tim. For these affordability calculations, the 10 or 15% rule, 15% in this case, would be applying to a single vehicle purchase. So if there are other vehicles in the household, that would be in excess of 15%, right?
Right.
So yeah, you could think of it that way. If it's a no car household adding a car, replacing a vehicle, then that would be a direct swap. But otherwise, that total vehicle cost, if you went to the 15% level, would exceed if you had multiple cars.
Okay. I also want to ask you if you have any examples of, so there were a lot of used car models that appear to sort of meet within the cost affordability. Do you have examples of model years and range for those vehicles? Because I know one of our concerns is, we don't want our lower income families to be getting into used vehicles that don't have sufficient range. And I'm curious, what the cost range and what the mileage range was for the cars you included in the used assessment.
Right. We did look at all vehicles in that fuel economy data set for which we could find price information, which was for a good amount of them. I don't have a handy table to look at offhand, but I'd be more than happy to follow up with you afterward about what that list looks like, maybe some illustrative vehicles demonstrating some different choices that might be available to people.
Great. Yeah, I'd appreciate that.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can say that based on our look at the new vehicle database, there are at least a couple of both SUVs and cars available, at different range levels, depending on how old the vehicles are, because we did go all the way back to 2010 looking at these used vehicles.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, can everyone hear me now?
Yeah, much clearer.
Okay, great. Sorry, everyone. I'm going to repeat my first message so everyone can hear me. Good morning, everyone. You can use the Zoom feature to raise your hand. For those of you participating by phone, press pound or #2 to raise your hand. When you're called on, please state your name and affiliation. I have another raised hand from Brett. Brett, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you, Aria. And this is Brett Zuner with the Foundation for California Community Colleges. I actually had a similar comment question to Tim about the number of vehicles per household. And yeah, just thinking through, like, for a 4-person household, how many vehicles they would have. And I guess building off of that, I think this type of analysis is really great. And so I'm really glad to see that we're doing this. And I guess one question I had was, is this type of analysis informing, I know later we're talking about the incentive amounts and thinking about, increasing those. Is this specific analysis or analyses like this that are happening? Are those informing those incentive restructuring decisions at CARB? And then secondary to that question, a model's only as good as the data and only as good as its assumptions. And I guess I wonder how much of the assumption, was drafted through maybe a more like user-centered design approach. I'm just thinking about, it's one thing for us to sit on a call and kind of guesstimate what somebody applying to one of these programs would be going through and what their life would look like and what really would be comfortable for them, versus getting that kind of input directly and then building a model and assumptions based off like a lived experience, a collectively kind of assessed lived experience through some engagement. Because I think the model that's created here is great, and it could really inform a lot and really help us change a lot of the issues that we see with the incentive structure and just the rapidly increasing cost of everything. And I think to take it a step further, really truth-proofing those assumptions with community groups. Tim's group just pointed out, through his work with communities, they see maybe that assumption of one vehicle for a 4-person isn't correct. Just little things like that I think if we go the extra mile and take a step back and take that extra time, we could really get it right, and then not have to kind of go back to things too soon. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that comment, Brett. I think that's a fabulous idea to kind of take these assumptions out and truth test them with folks, and get their sense of how it compares to their lived experience. I think that would really help us hone these assumptions. We tried to be pretty conservative with the assumptions to try to capture as much kind of comfort as we could for folks in terms of making decisions about purchasing vehicles. But as you say, that might vary by community, from person to person even. So being able to kind of dial those things in a consumer specific way and in a user specific way is a really fabulous idea, and something that I think we're intending to do for future iterations of this analysis. But we'll definitely log that. I don't want to get too far out over my skis. Maybe I'll let Raquel address the other question about how much this informed the process. But Raquel, go
Yes.
ahead.
Yes, Brett, I'll go into it in some more detail later on in the presentation. But yes, this did help inform the proposal that we are putting on the table for discussion today, as well as looking at program data and the purchase price of vehicles that are coming through our programs. So that was another thing that we helped, that helped inform that decision. But again, I'll go into further detail once we get to that presentation. But thank you for your comments again, as well on the model and how we can tweak it. We're definitely open to suggestions there. And I think this is something that could help us down the line as we continue looking at the market, as the market grows and things change, and how we can better inform those the decisions to increase incentives further down the road as well.
And I just wanted to chime in a bit as well, as I think Brett's comments are right on point. It's to go back to John's earlier comments about feedback is very important and welcome. It'll be an iterative design, as most of our research is, as we gather more. And so this was very much the first draft based on best available data, but that does absolutely need to be refined. And part of the reason we're here today, and to Ramon's point about transparency on the metrics and making sure that it's really clear what's in the model and where something doesn't look appropriate, doesn't feel right, and kind of making sure that it is being adjusted for real life feedback. And so I think, Brett, look forward to having maybe a longer conversation, and anyone else as well that is looking at some of those bits and doesn't feel quite right. The whole intention here is on a going forward basis to continue to refine all of our models really, but this one in particular to make sure that it reflects lived experience, real world, and not a too distant, far removed bit. The other piece is that we're talking about kind of a law of averages when it comes to affordability. It's not saying that there aren't folks and circumstances that will fall on kind of both sides where they'll need to spend less because of their specific circumstances, or they'll be willing and able to spend more. So it's not a hard and fast rule. It is meant to be kind of an informative mile marker about how appropriately designed are the incentives for the target audiences that we're trying to help, especially in the low income space. And it was something that we hadn't kind of previously brought to the table as far as consideration. And as we are really trying to remove those barriers and take the next step, it was important to start to look at some of these factors. So what are we asking people to spend of their own dime to get into, in particular, CDR pre-perspective, a new EV? And what does that look like in comparison as well for the used EVs? And bringing some more data to the conversation about the design space. But completely hear and agree that it should be informed. It should be iterative, and we are very open, starting now. If there's insights or perspectives that folks want to share about particular elements, please do reach out to either myself or John, and we'd love to learn more about the basis and see what we can do to make the model work even better.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, team. So we've got a little bit more time for a few more raised hands. Next up, we have Laura Ranger. Laura, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi, good morning. It's Laura Ranger from California Electric Transportation Coalition. This is really helpful analysis, and I was just wondering, John, did you also do this for incomes above the current CVRP income cap to figure out what that would look like in terms of how many vehicles would be available, say, or affordable, say up to the $300,000 per household level?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Laura. Under the hood, we can set these income levels fairly arbitrarily. So one thing we didn't present here was this line graph that shows choice over income, kind of as a numeric scale, so we can set any kind of income level and see how many choices are available. So we don't have that here to present today, but we certainly have that, and I'd be happy to follow up with the number of choices at those levels.
Thank you.
Next up, we have LaDonna Williams. LaDonna, I've unmuted your mic.
Yes, good morning, LaDonna Williams, all positives possible. I was just wondering, thank you for the information and looking over some of this data. And I believe it was Aaron went through the breakdown of the allocations, I guess. So I was hoping at some point he can go over that again. I didn't see it in the presentations of the breakdown. But I was just wondering how much with this modeling did you consider the actual factual rates of or amounts that people are paying? For instance, a used vehicle that, let's say pre-COVID or middle COVID, we'll give it maybe 2021. In the used market was averaging, and say a Honda or Toyota averaged about $2,500 used. And these are older models. Now they're between $6,000 and $9,000. Have you factored that into this cost? Not to mention, we're not advocating, forcing used vehicles on folks that are already overburdened with financial issues as well, taking on a used vehicles and somebody else's, used vehicle creates even more maintenance issues. But also in the areas where disadvantaged and low income areas are, they tend to pay more for the maintenance with these mechanics. The insurance is much higher in these disadvantaged areas. How much of that has been factored into this? And I won't wrongly assume, because you know what the word assume means, that I'm seeing this $15,000 added in there, but I do recall being asked a question in the past, well, what number would you throw out as an increased number? And I recall saying $15,000. That was just off the top of my head. Others may have said it as well, but it was to make the point, not that we thought that dollar amount would be adequate, but it was more so bringing you up out of the mindset that $7,500 was actually helping make a difference when it isn't. It's just setting people up for failure. So I recognize you also said at the beginning that, you know, it's still being drafted. So you're taking feedback and information from the public. So we know what we're seeing here is not set in stone, but I'm just saying, as you go back to the drawing board today, those numbers have to be increased when you're looking at real, actual live numbers and what people are being forced to pay because of this, you know, so-called COVID, what should I call it? They're claiming we've got COVID stimulus payments, but them payments actually have meant nothing when they've given an average of what, $1,400, yet everything has quadrupled in price, including these used vehicles. So anyway, thank you, and I'll end there.
Thanks, LaDonna. I appreciate your comments and questions there. I think in terms of the cost assumption, what your comment made me think is perhaps we should redo this analysis with a high bound assumption on what we might see in terms of operating costs. Maybe we find kind of extreme examples on the high end and then see what that looks like in terms of how many choices are available. Definitely hear your comment loud and clear about you know, not necessarily wanting to force people into used cars and maintenance costs being different for used cars and things like that. I think one of the key takeaways from this analysis, from my perspective, is that we're not doing enough currently to make these vehicles affordable on the new side of things, and that adding some additional incentive dollars there might bring some choices into range for folks. Again, assuming this set of assumptions, which might vary depending on a number of different factors, including like credit scores and differing insurance rates in different areas and things like that. So definitely hear your feedback there. In terms of the costs that we included in for the vehicles, in terms of you know, how things have changed due to the supply constraints and other things due to COVID or inflation or other things. For the used vehicles, the data we gathered were in August of this year. So that's a kind of fair purchase price, which from Kelley Blue Book factors in what people are reporting to KBB about what they're actually spending on these cars. So we're thinking that's a pretty good representation on what the used vehicles cost for folks now. On the new side, we're looking at model minimum MSRPs, and again, not factoring in those dealer markups. So actual costs that people might find at new car dealerships may very well be much higher than those like model minimum MSRPs for vehicles. So that's definitely something that we could refine by, you know, looking at like actual invoice costs from KBB or other sources. So thanks for your comments there.
John, I would like to ask you though, when you mentioned you guys did the cost analysis in August on the used vehicles, can you tell me which areas or who you contacted, or was it just Kelley Blue Book that you looked at, or did you contact any actual used car dealers?
Yeah, it's a good question. We used Kelley Blue Book with the San Diego address as kind of the anchor point.
Okay, so you never actually talked with anyone that purchased the used vehicles or any of these local used car dealers?
We have not, no.
Okay, just so that you know, though, there's a significant difference in what you're seeing on Kelley Blue Book and what they are actually requiring now through used vehicles.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for that feedback. We'll note that down and maybe do a survey of what we can see in terms of used vehicle prices and see how that compares and maybe make some adjustments based on that. So thank you.
And
And
LaDonna,
just-
oh, I'm sorry, LaDonna, go ahead.
I was just going to note that, yeah, these are very good points that we were working with what was readily available data sets, and concur, I think, with the feedback that I don't want to speak for LaDonna, that there may need to be additional data collection that goes above and beyond what's currently available in order to get a clearer picture, which again is something we heartily agree with and look forward to working on gathering. And so if there are existing data sources that folks know, or there are people that have some information that they want to share that thinks, again, we're very open to refining this further, recognizing we worked with what was available on hand and readily accessible, and recognizing that there may be limitations that need to be adjusted. So I think LaDonna's raised a really good point for us here as far as one area that we need to explore further. And I think that may also be true of some of the averages that we have for things like insurance costs. I think that may be true nationally, but when we're talking about lower income consumers in particular in California, there may be additional adjustments. And so again, whatever we can be pointed to as far as existing data is always great. And if the existing data doesn't exist, then we got to figure out who to and how to survey, both quantitative and qualitatively at the very least, to gather that information. So I think this is a very relevant point that's been made, and appreciate the comment.
And then LaDonna, I wanted to follow up on your question regarding allocations. Were you specifically looking at, are you looking for specific program allocations, or were you referring to the budget overview that I gave us in the kickoff remarks?
I think it may have been the budget overview, but I'm just talking about whatever part refers to giving that that incentive. I think it was a 15,000. It was increased from, was it 11 or 13 or something like that. But whatever that incentive amount was, it showed that 15,000. I looked at it as that would be the total amount of incentives that it's been increased to offset the cost of a vehicle when we're, looking at an average vehicle now of, almost $30,000 with tax, license, and all of that, or even the new vehicle starting at that, we know that it's going to be significantly higher. So I was just, making that point that even still those numbers are way off if we're really talking about providing some real benefits.
Okay, thank you for that comment, LaDonna. And later on in the presentation, we are going to be proposing some increases across the board to the vehicle purchase and incentive programs. And so I think that's more to come on that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And only because it's come up previously, I don't want us to lose sight of the EV incentive is definitely important. And I think the presentation we're going to hear from CARB later on kind of addresses some of these questions about, are the incentives set at the right bit? We also know it's a kind of a parking lot issue for this conversation today about access to infrastructure universally, or at least in target communities that aren't seeing that investment today, can't be overlooked as, a relevant, separate, and equally important topic. We're focused today, I really think, about the vehicle side, but we can't lose sight of the infrastructure piece as well, and just making sure that we tag that, put a pin in it for those other conversations, but it's critically important that we're solving the infrastructure access issue concurrently with addressing whether or not the incentive amounts are truly sufficient for real world circumstances that lower income consumers in particular are facing, especially in this time of inflation and post-pandemic, current pandemic space. There are a lot of other demands. And so that is the whole point of this affordability exercise. It was the first step. There needs to be refinement, and we just really appreciate as much commentary as far as where you think folks think the model could be improved upon, as well as access to some of that available data that might help inform it sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Next up, we have Roman. Roman, I've unmuted your mic.
Thanks, Aria. Roman Partea Lopez with the Greenlining Institute. Thanks, John, for the presentation and for this discussion. A lot of great and useful information here. Just a couple thoughts. I think in spirit of the transparency and procedural equity, I really appreciated Jonathan's comment about being able to provide input, additional additional considerations for assumptions and analysis, especially if this analysis is going to be influencing the incentive amount that we end up determining for the vehicle incentive programs. I really hope that we can create, again, a really transparent process where, we're not just engaging through this workshop, right, where we can provide input, but really being intentional of setting up times with those that are interested in providing more input, and doing so in a transparent and public process, right? So it's very clear of the input that we're providing, and then hopefully being that reflected in in the analysis or reports that end up happening related to these programs, right? So I think we're all here because we really care about them, and we want to make sure that the analysis are done in a way that will get more vehicles in our community. So wanted to really just uplift that and ensure that we're creating those processes, right? And whether that's additional workshops or other intentional meetings that we have in order to dive deeper into this, I think that'd be really helpful. To that point, one of the things that I was thinking of as I was looking at this presentation, especially under the assumptions section, when we're looking at the interest rate, here it's 9.7 for new, 10% for used. And I'm just curious, and I know, John, you explained a little bit of where that came from, but I think thinking of how we align this to the existing programs that we have, right? If we're going to thinking about the incentives that are available through each of the programs, CVAP has a 8% cap on, and 8% cap for those that are accessing the incentive, and then 12% if they do external financing. So thinking of whether there's a way of running, scenarios that include that, right? If that is numbers, interest rate numbers that we're utilizing within the programs, so that we're trying to align the analysis to not just the incentive amounts, but even the financing that might be available for lower income consumers through this program. So wanting to flag that and curious if that was thought through in the analysis. And then I think some of this has already been raised, but around the availability of vehicles, right? I think, I think we can determine if they're affordable, but I think availability is definitely an issue. I mean, we know there's a shortage of new and used vehicles, so how that was contemplated and in this analysis, and it may have not, right? Because I think there's a lot of fluctuation there right now, but curious if that was considered. And then lastly, just thinking of those last charts that y'all had definitely had a list of available vehicle or eligible affordable vehicles that each of these various income levels could access, and whether that list would be publicly available to see which ones they are. So thank you.
Thanks, Roman. Really appreciate the comments. I'll leave the comment about more workshops and work groups to the CARB team, but addressing your comment about the interest rates, we definitely can set the interest rates up to 12% or down to 8% to kind of align with the CVA program requirements. We wanted to take the average here to give a sense of what affordability might look like outside of those program restrictions, but we could certainly add some scenarios that account for those requirements, and I'll add that to our list to do so that we can see how that changes things. Of course, if we lowered the rates, there might be a couple more options available, and if we raise them up, there might be a few fewer options available, and that might change somewhat significantly. So that's definitely something to look at. We didn't factor in vehicle availability in this, and I think that's a really good point, because even if a vehicle is affordable, if it's not available, that's not really doing anyone any good. And that's something that would be great to factor into this. Might be a little tricky to do, especially on a kind of California-wide scope, but yeah, we'll put that on our list as well to see if we can address that in some way. And then your final comment about what types of vehicles are available under each of these different kind of the cells, looking at that table. It certainly wouldn't be too much to do that for a couple of scenarios. Maybe we take some illustrative mixes and then display the vehicle options. Thanks for that feedback. We can definitely do that.
Thanks, John.
And Ramon, with regard to interest rates, that did catch my eye as well, and is something that we had already flagged kind of as we iterate going forward. Time being of the essence is revisiting that exactly as you suggested to align with some of the other programs. So agree on that piece, and do think that as we do iterate on this modeling effort, that will be one area where we'll look to align with the other programs for sure.
Thank you, Ramon, for your comments, and everybody else who's provided comment on this model. Again, we'll keep fine tuning it as we move forward, and again, appreciate the feedback. So thanks, John, for your presentation as well. We're ready to move on to the next topic. We'll get the slides switched out. So as we've heard over the course of the funding plan process this year, there's a desire to provide charging incentives through CVRP for the first time. So staff took the time to analyze the average annual charging costs of new battery electric and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles in order to inform staff's recommendations for where to set charging incentives. So today we'll briefly walk through that analysis, which will be included in full detail in this year's funding plan, and discuss the results and how they may impact recommendations for charging incentive levels in CARB's vehicle purchase incentive program. Staff used the vehicle cost calculator from the United States Department of Energy Alternative Fuels Data Center to analyze the average annual cost to charge a battery electric vehicle and plug-in hybrid electric vehicle to help determine which amount to set prepaid charge cards at in our vehicle purchase incentive programs. This tool uses basic information about driving habits to calculate the total cost of ownership and emissions for makes and models of most vehicles, including alternative fuel and advanced technology vehicles. Staff did analyze all new model year battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles that are currently eligible for CVRP. So I did want to provide you a screenshot here of the vehicle cost calculator. And as you can see, you can select specific vehicles, adjust the daily use. And once a vehicle is selected, you can choose your state so that the average electricity cost for your state is taken into consideration. The calculator uses vehicle data from fueleconomy.gov. And I will note that this calculator used a national average of $3.8 a gallon of gasoline, which was the national average when they made their assumptions for this calculator initially. But as we know, the average for a gallon of gas in California is definitely much higher. So staff made sure to factor in the average for California. And when this analysis was done in August. So here are some additional details on the assumptions that were used in this analysis. The assumptions in the calculator were adjusted to reflect the annual mileage assumptions that we use in Appendix A for the quantification of our programs of this funding plan, and then is also used in various CARB modeling. And that's 14,885 miles for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and 14,400 miles for battery electric vehicles. A default assumption of 45% miles traveled on the highway and 55% miles traveled in the city was used in this analysis. An average gasoline cost of $5.50 was assumed, as it was the California average per gallon of gasoline at the time that staff completed this analysis. The calculator automatically factored in an electricity cost of 23 cents per kilowatt hour, which is the average electricity cost for California. And for all plug-in hybrid electric vehicle models, it was assumed that the vehicle was plugged in once a day, and costs for fueling are calculated separately from costs for electricity for the purposes of this analysis. Based on the results of the analysis, the average annual electricity cost to charge a CVRP eligible battery electric vehicle, given current electricity cost averages for California, is $1,074. the average annual electricity cost to charge a CVRP eligible plug-in hybrid, given current electricity costs, is $1,160. So given those results, staff recommends a minimum prepaid charge card incentive of $1,000 to help cover a majority of the first year of charging. However, our equity-focused programs may choose to offer higher incentive amounts to further offset charging costs for lower income participants. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions and comments on this analysis from meeting attendees. Again, please use the raise hand function if you would like to ask a question or make a comment. If you are calling in by phone, please press #2. And again, please state your name and affiliation before asking a question or making a comment. So I'll turn it over to Aria.
Thanks, Raquel. We have a few raised hands. Tim Tyner, I've unmuted your mic.
Thanks, Aria. Tim Tyner, Central California Asthma Collaborative. One comment question. The assumption using the California average energy rate of 23 cents per kilowatt hour, these prepaid charge cards would all be used at public charging stations. The EVSPs charge between 35 cents, 45 cents per kilowatt hour. So in some cases it would be, twice as much as the California average. So I think maybe you're underestimating what the cost would be. That's my only comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate your feedback there, and I think we'll go back and adjust there and see if there will be adjustments to our proposal. Thank you.
Next up, we have Richard Tebay. Richard, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to hear your thinking and to comment. First thing I would point out is that most of the plug-in hybrid electrics are going to be limited to L2. There are only a handful of vehicles that that are capable of DC fast charging. The second thing I would point out is that DC fast charging is typically far more expensive than L2. I typically see L2s for 25 cents a kilowatt and DC fast charging for substantially more, with the exception of Tesla. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Richard, for your comments. We'll take those into consideration.
Next up, we have Laura Ranger. Laura, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi, thanks, Laura Ranger from Cali TC. The slide on slide 17 is really helpful. Thank you for that. Did you also calculate, using these same assumptions, calculate the cost for a comparable ICE vehicle?
We did not. That is definitely something, though, that we could incorporate down the road as we kind of try to get that overall picture of costs for an electric vehicle versus costs for an internal combustion engine vehicle.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next up, we have Chris Chavez. Chris, I have unmuted your mic.
Great. Chris Chavez with Coalition for Clean Air again. I just really briefly want to second the comment from Laura about getting the comparable costs, or the comparative costs, I should say, to maintaining an ICE vehicle. Also, just generally speaking, in terms of providing higher amounts for equity consumers, certainly I think that is something that would be very helpful in helping those consumers transition to electric vehicles. So appreciate that concept. Would love to see it fleshed out more, but also understand this is the first time we're seeing it. So, but would certainly encourage CARB to continue developing that idea.
Great. Thank you so much for your comments, Chris.
Next up, we have Brett. Brett, I have unmuted your mic.
Thanks so much, Aria. This is Brett, senior with the Foundation for California Community Colleges. And I had a couple questions. So is this meant to inform the kind of prepaid charging card incentives, not just for CVRP, but also for the other programs, specifically like Clean Cars for All and the financing assistance programs. And kind of building off of that question, just wondering, if somebody were to apply for one of those, say Clean Cars for All, which could be stacked with CVRP, and they both have charging incentives, are those also stackable? Maybe we're not there yet though in terms of that thought, and it's preemptive. And then I guess the final just question I had was, I know that in terms of the actual implementation, I just found out that Valley Can is doing a study with GoBiz around like a universal charging card. And that's more like the actual methodology of how people would use the payment. And I was excited to see it, but then also was like, oh, where did that come from? Because I had never heard of that before the press release that it was being implemented. And the reason I bring that up is because I know at current, every program does their own thing. And so some programs partner with specific EV charging networks. So like if you go through X regional program, like, you get a charge card, but you can only charge at certain specific EV charging companies. And then others have tried to look at the universal charge card option. And I'm glad to see Valley Can doing that study. But I just wonder, is anything baked into this to think about, because we talked about vehicle choice and affordability and the importance of choice, and just making sure that when we think about charging, that the actual charge card itself gives people choice, so that they can charge wherever they want, knowing that different communities are served by different charging providers. So thank you.
Thanks, Brett. So yes, this analysis, the initial reason behind it was, charge cards are new to CVRP, and we wanted to make sure, the limit we set it at is something sufficient to help charge or pay for charging for that first year for people coming through, lower income applicants coming through CVRP. But it will also help inform amounts in our other programs and financing assistance, as well as Clean Cars for All. And I think with the comments we received today, we'll dial those in and see how that adjusts proposal, and if that calls for an adjustment in the other programs as well. They do currently, financing assistance and Clean Cars for All both offer, I want to say, about $1,500 prepaid charge card. And so it's slightly higher, but again, we will dial in the comments we received today and see how that affects those amounts. In regards to stacking, yes, so if with CVRP now bringing in a charge card aspect, if an applicant went through CVRP as well as Clean Cars for All, they would be able to stack those charging incentives. So that's part of the proposal as well. And in terms of the universal card, I know at the state level, Caltrans is working on developing a universal payment system for transportation in general. So something that could be used on regional transit, something at charging stations for electric vehicles and things of that nature. And that's in the works. It's in pilot phases right now, and it's something we're hoping to help support in the next year or two, so that we can get that up and running, and that would help feed into our programs as well as having that universal charge card or payment option for transportation.
Thank you so much. And just to clarify, yeah, so I'm not sure if you were referring though to, I knew that Caltrans had the Cal ITP program, but it was news to me when I read that press release that Valley Can was actually doing a very specific pilot with GoBiz, with the governor's office, around EV charging specifically with, I believe it was with participants of that Clean Cars for All program. It's actually like piloting out a EV charging card. And the only reason I bring that up is because I think making sure that what's learned from there gets out to the rest of the CARB vehicle incentive programs. And it sounds like that is the goal. So that's great to hear, and also great to hear that it stacks. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Nicholas Paul Nicholas, I've unmuted your mic.
Good morning, everyone. Quick question. Maybe I missed it during the presentation, but can you clarify if the charge card incentive is also applying to both new and used vehicle purchasers?
So in CVRP, that program only provides funding for new vehicles. So when we add a charge card there, it would only be for new vehicles. I believe in our other programs, financing assistance and Clean Cars for All, it may be focused on new only, but I will toss it over to either Aaron Hilliard or Anthony Poggi to focus more on the C4.
Yeah, the charge card in Clean Cars for All is, to clarify, up to $2,000, and it is available for new and used plug-in hybrid or battery electric vehicles. So those that to choose those vehicles, it's eligible, new or used, for Clean Cars for All. And Ali, if you want to chime in on financing assistance.
Yeah, it's more or less the same for financing assistance. We provide EVSE installation up to $2,000, or for those who have installation barriers, we offer charge cards of $1,000 plus a level 2 portable charger.
And just to add on, the EVSE option is available through Clean Cars for All as well, up to $2,000 for EVSE or the charge card option.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Tommy Oho. Tommy, I've unmuted your mic.
Hello, yeah, this is Tommy Ojo. I work for a nonprofit organization called All Positives Possible. I'm working from the Vallejo area. One of your slides I took note of. I saw the annual mileage on the vehicles. It said around like 14,000 miles, and and it's pretty much 40 miles a day. I was just inquiring if these are personal or business miles, because it seems a bit low. I was just looking into like asking what type of what are they really considering when they're making these assumptions of the mileages that we're going to be using annually.
Yeah, Tommy, thank you for your question. And so these averages come from previous CARB studies of daily usage, I believe personal usage of vehicles, and have been used in other various modeling at our agency. Aria Berliner, I know you're overseeing kind of our methodology there when we're talking about quantification and these assumptions come up. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, so I'm not going to get on camera because I'm not camera ready, but we update these numbers every few years to based on relevant research from academia and then also internally at CARB. So for instance, a few years ago, the BEV, or the battery electric vehicle annual mileage, was about 12,000 miles, but based on updated data and actual real world usage of Phevs, that number was changed to 14.4. We're getting it from real world data, as well as onboard devices and through research that we've conducted at CARB.
Yeah, and just to ask, are these like California averages or American averages, or like where do the averages really come from?
I can't recall for the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, but for the battery electric vehicles, they are California averages.
Okay, one of the reasons I was inquiring, because like my nonprofit, it's kind of like I work with more disadvantaged communities, and one of the primary jobs a lot of people from these these disadvantaged communities do is usually things like services like DoorDash and Lyft and these types of things. So when they do these types of jobs, the miles, it really shoots up greatly. And when I'm speaking for disadvantaged communities, they really are going to be stretching out the mileage usage of some of these cars. So that's why I was wondering exactly where these averages were coming from at, because I'm speaking for the disadvantaged communities. They're probably going to have a lot more miles than the 14,000.
Tommy, absolutely. And I do want to say that this 14,400 number was definitely looked at before the big boom in delivery services and Uber. And so thank you. That is something that we will definitely look at in the future when we update our annual mileage.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's my turn. Sorry. Next up, we have Roman. Roman, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you, Aria. This is Roman Partea Lopez with the Greenlining Institute. Just one quick question. I didn't see this in the slides, but in the funding plan draft, it says that the prepaid charge card is for the increased rebate applicants. Is that still true, or will it be available for everyone?
Hi, Ramon. Thank you for your comment. Yes, the at least for now, the proposal is still to include those prepaid charge cards only for increased rebate participants.
Thank you.
There are no more raised hands.
Okay, we will move on then to our next part of the agenda, and that's our draft proposal for increased incentive amounts. So one of the key themes throughout this funding plan process that we heard was a call for a reevaluation of the incentive levels offered in our light duty vehicle purchase incentive programs. So in this portion of the work group, we will go over staff's draft proposal for making adjustments to the incentives offered through CVRP, Clean Cars for All, and financing assistance. And then we'll discuss updated stacked incentive totals given this proposal. So in response to stakeholder input, an ongoing analysis of the EV market and current economic conditions, staff recognize a need for an increase in vehicle purchase incentive amounts as the current electric vehicle incentive package is not enough to get car buyers into cleaner cars, especially when we're talking about lower income car buyers. Additionally, staff has seen the purchase price of vehicles receiving CVRP increased rebates increasing from about $29,000 in 2016 to about $43,000 at the end of 2021, an increase of about $14,000. A similar trend was also seen in Clean Cars for All, with the purchase price of vehicles receiving CC4A incentives increasing from about $20,000 in 2016 to about $35,000 at the end of 2021. Again, an increase of about $15,000. And while we've seen record participation in our programs, it has been harder for approved applicants to find an EV that fits their budget, given our current incentive package. And with that in mind, staff is proposing increases to all light duty vehicle purchase incentive programs. Again, we fully recognize that this is the first time you are seeing these proposals, but please understand that none of this is final, and you will have additional opportunities to provide comments before staff finalizes this proposal for the funding. While final budget numbers did just drop, staff do need to make some adjustments to funding splits, but we still believe that now is the right time to consider increasing incentives for lower income car buyers. So first we'll take a look at the proposal for CVRP, which provides increased rebates for applicants with incomes at or below 400% of the federal poverty. So for example, a family of two with a combined household income of just over $73,000, or a family of four with a combined household income of $111,000 would qualify for the increased rebate. Staff is considering a $3,000 increase to CVRP low and moderate income increase rebate totals, bringing the rebate totals for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles to $6,500 and bringing rebate totals for battery electric vehicles to a total of $7,500. Staff is also proposing a modest increase for increased rebates for fuel cell electric vehicles to align with battery electric vehicles at $7,500, as incentives for these vehicle types are also aligned in our other vehicle purchase incentive programs. This slide illustrates staff's proposal for Clean Cars for All. In addition to reducing the income limit to 300% of the federal poverty level, staff is proposing to collapse income tiers into one, 300% of the federal poverty level and below. This translates to a maximum household income of about $55,000 for a family of two and about $83,000 for a family of four. Staff is also proposing modest increase in incentive amounts by offering $9,500 for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and $10,000 each for battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles. Staff is also proposing to include a $2,000 adder for applicants living in disadvantaged community census tracts in an effort to direct more dollars to the communities that need it most. In addition to increases in incentive amounts, staff is also considering directing existing district-run CC4A programs to provide incentives for their entire territory and not just limit their programs to the disadvantaged communities in their territories. Lastly, staff is also considering setting income limits at or below 300% of the federal poverty level for both statewide and district-run CC programs. Staff believes that both of these changes allow for easier implementation of Clean Cars for All at a statewide and air district level and reduces confusion for participants. Similar to Clean Cars for All, staff is proposing a reduction in the income limit to 300% of the federal poverty level and collapsing income tiers into one, 300% of the federal poverty level and below in financing assistance. Staff is also proposing increases to incentive amounts, bringing totals to $7,000 for plug-in hybrids and $7,500 for battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles. Taking these proposals into account, we wanted to spend a little time to go over how they impact the total stacked incentive amounts that an eligible car buyer may get when utilizing multiple car vehicle purchase incentive programs. Currently, eligible car buyers can get $8,000 to $12,000 towards a new EV without having to scrap an old vehicle, and $9,000 to $16,500 towards a new EV when scrapping an older vehicle. With staff's proposed increases to incentives, eligible car buyers with incomes at or below 300% of the federal poverty level would now be able to get $13,500 to $15,000 towards a new EV without scrapping an older vehicle, and between $16,000 and $19,500 towards a new EV when scrapping an older vehicle. In addition to these stacked incentive totals, eligible applicants can receive charging incentives and also choose to go through the financing assistance program to obtain low interest rate loans for the purchase of their vehicle. With the proposal to expand CVRP Rebate Now statewide, or our pre-qualification pilot, this provides the opportunity to apply all stacked incentives at the point of purchase. So to put this into perspective, the average price of a new EV at the moment ranges from about $40,000 to $50,000 and probably a little more. But the stacked incentive amount could help cover about a third to half of the vehicle's cost. So this slide just illustrates the breakdown of those stacked incentive totals given staff's proposal to increase incentives in all programs. As you can see, the amount does vary by vehicle type, whether an older vehicle is scrapped, and whether that applicant lives in a disadvantaged community census tract. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions and comments, and I will turn it over to Aria to handle.
Thanks, Raquel. Just as a reminder, please state your name and affiliation when you're called on. You can use the Zoom raise hand function to raise your hand. If you're dialing in by phone, you can use the pound or hashtag 2 sign. First up, we have Carrie Todd. Carrie, I have unmuted your mic.
Awesome. I hope you all can hear me. My name is Carrie Todd with the San Joaquin Valley Air District, and I just wanted to jump on really quick. Number one, to just express our appreciation for the work you guys have put into this, but that we fully support the incentive increase as well as the expansion to non-DACs within our jurisdiction. So thank you.
Thank you, Carrie.
Next up, we have Laura Ranger. Laura, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi, thank you, Laura Ranger with Cali TC. Just wanted to express our support for the increase for the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle incentive. That's a really good option, especially for single car households that may need to use that car for multiple purposes. I also wanted to ask if there was any analysis, kind of going back to scenario 2 that CSE did before, on lifting the cap on CVRP at the 400% level, or was this analysis solely done anticipating that that cap would not be lifted?
So yes, I think based on our previous analysis, we still feel that leaving the caps where they are is the right policy call for CVRP. So those are the income limits that we have taken into consideration when looking at these incentive amounts.
Okay, thank you. I would just to add on to that, I think Cali TC still maintains that we would support lifting the income caps to provide more Californians with the option, and especially as funding changes or may change over the next few months in terms of what's available. I'd just like to strongly encourage CARB to take another look at that depending on the funding situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Next up, we have Paul Hernandez. Paul, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, everyone. This is Paul Hernandez with EBCE. Thank you for the presentation today. I had a quick question in regards to eligibility. Would this also apply to fleets and car share, and as well as municipal fleets, which are also eligible under CVRP? Or is this exclusively focused on the target market of households?
So this proposal, as we're talking about now, focuses on the individual increased rebate applicants. However, we do recognize that public fleets that operate in disadvantaged communities are eligible for these increased incentive amounts. So we can keep that conversation going, but I think it's in at least staff's point of view that would be the same. So the public fleets operating in disadvantaged communities would be able to take advantage of a higher incentive amount. But again, that's not set in stone, and we welcome any additional feedback on that.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Next up, we have Chris Chavez. Chris, I've unmuted your mic.
Yeah, thank you. Chris Chavez, Coalition for Clean Air. Just first of all, wanted to thank staff and taking our comments. I know Coalition for Clean Air, Charge Ahead has submitted. We've had a number of conversations on the Clean Cars for All program, and certainly appreciate seeing some of the changes from the initial concepts. One question I just wanted to get some clarity on is regarding, and perhaps the Valley Air District person asked this unfortunately, but I had a computer issue that came up during that question. But if not, so since it's clear that the district-based programs are going to continue, is there still the possibility of overlap between the statewide program and the air district program? So basically, is it possible that like two programs will be coexisting in the same area going forward?
Thanks for your question, Chris. I can handle this one. Chris, there should not be any overlap as we're designing it right now. There will be districts will have able to administer the programs in their own jurisdictions, and outside those jurisdictions will be the statewide program. Of course, there are some boundary areas where there could be some questions, but I think that'll be very minimal in the grand scheme of things. The districts are very clear on where their jurisdictions begin and end,
And anyone inside of those jurisdictions will be applying to their programs, and anyone outside will be intended to go to the statewide program.
Got it. Got it. All right. Well, thank you very much for that clarification, and certainly appreciate that. And again, I would just go back to my comment I made during the AB630 report section of the presentation. It's just saying, we really just keeping track and making sure that we're maximizing the amount of dollars going to disadvantaged community census tracts. I think the proposal to increase the incentive amounts for disadvantaged communities is certainly welcome. And I think perhaps a step in the right direction. But just making sure that we're not seeing a slippage of the benefits going directly into disadvantaged communities, I think is very, has been very important for Charge Ahead, both as a campaign, but also for the Charge Ahead California law, SB 1275. And of course, again, you have the requirements in SB 535 and AB 1550. So just wanted to reiterate the importance of maximizing those benefits in disadvantaged communities. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Chris. It's something that we'll be paying very close attention to as these things roll out. So thank you.
Next up, we have Richard Tebay. Richard, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you. So my question is, how did you arrive at the average cost for an EV and a plug-in hybrid? My concern is that it probably doesn't reflect the vehicles that are coming. And I'm just thinking of the Chevy Bolts, for example, that have much lower baselines. The Ford pickup, the Chevy pickup that are, at least the bottom line price is less than $40,000. And the concern I have is just that I would not want the dealer to game the system with market adjustments, so that the funding goes to the dealer rather than to the benefit of the individual.
Yes, thank you for your comments. And consumer protections are definitely high on the list for us. And I think it's our goal to ensure that all of those funds are realized by the applicant and avoid what we don't have jurisdiction over dealers, and so there's only so much we can do on that end. But what we can do on our end is, when we're implementing these programs, those dealers that are registered to apply these incentives at the point of purchase, there are protections we can make sure are there on our end.
Okay, next up is Brett Zuner. Brett, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you. Yes, and thanks for updating us on this really important stuff, because I think it's been a long time coming, and especially with the current economic situation, this will be really welcomed news. One quick comment on the last participants, pointing out the risk of the dealers doing markups. I just wanted to point out that there's some positive news coming out, like Ford, for example, is moving for all EVs to just be through Ford corporate to avoid dealer markups. So they're actually removing the dealers from their EV sales because they've seen the markups happen. Others, I don't think, are taking that approach, but General Motors has committed to developing an action kind of system, and just addressing any fluctuations in price. So I think it may be surprising to some folks, but to see at the top level from the OEMs themselves, it seems like they also are aware of this. So I'm hopeful, maybe naively so, that CARB and at the state level especially, that y'all will be able to work with the OEMs, hopefully, to make sure that the prices don't get gouged, especially in our lower income communities that typically do see such practices regularly, being charged different rates. So I'm semi-hopeful there, but I guess we'll come to see. The one question I did have though here was regarding the participants who are currently in limbo. So I think the other air districts on the line are aware, as CARB staff I'm sure is also aware, that there are bottlenecks right now, and there are a lot of participants who have struggled to find not just vehicles that they can afford, but vehicles in general. And I'm wondering, is there any plan, or is that kind of in the works to think about what might happen when these incentive amounts are changed and you have people in, they're in the queue right now looking for a car and unable to find an affordable option, and they're under that 300% FPL, and they were when they applied, for example. Would they be, kind of beholden to the former limits, or would they have to kind of rescind their application and resubmit and rejoin the queue to get the enhanced amount? Have those things been thought about yet? Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. I'm going to turn it over to the CC4A team to tackle that question.
So great, Brett, thanks for your question. I think we're still mulling over, how to deal with that situation right now. This is our initial proposal. As we've mentioned, it's not set in stone. I think we'll be working with the air districts moving forward to figure out what the best way to handle that situation is. So to answer your question, it's still being worked on.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Roman. Roman, I have unmuted your mic.
Thanks, Aria. This is Roman Partea Lopez with the Guideline Institute. Yeah, just to build off, well, first off, thank you for the slides here. This is appreciate y'all being transparent about your thought process here on increasing incentive amounts, and definitely being responsive to previous comments that the Greenlining Coalition for Clean Air, the Charge Ahead Coalition have provided regarding this program, as well as the statewide expansion. Just to build off of what I think Rick Tibet mentioned earlier, I think it's going to be really important to think through those consumer protections, right? I hear what Brett is saying, and that there's going to be some more direct sales happening around EVs, but updating obviously the implementation manual to reflect those consumer protections, it's going to be really critical. And for those that do still require going through a dealership, that those dealerships that are participating in the program are aware of what those consumer protection is, to avoid seeing those markup costs right on these vehicles, because now there's such a much higher incentive amount that folks are be eligible for. And so again, being really clear of what those are. In regards to the distinction between who administers what, right? Like programs for the air districts and then programs for the statewide administrator, we appreciate that. Just a question on the budget numbers, and I know that's not what is being discussed here today. That'll be for next week in the next workshop, because I know you are still working through the details of that. But I'm curious whether the allocations are going to reflect that shift, right? Because before it was a much more significant dollar amount for statewide expansion and then lower for the air districts. But now with this shift to having the air districts administer their whole district, just curious whether that will also be reflected in the budget amounts that we see.
Hi, Ramon. Thanks for your question. So the budget as listed, there is a line item for the 125 million for statewide, and there's a minimum of 80 million to the district programs. We're still working on final allocations and things like that, which will be presented at the workshop next week, September 8th. But I think initial thinking is, I think that is one of the considerations as we look at allocations. And so I think there's more to come on the final allocations for that number to be presented next week. But that is something that is being taken into consideration.
Right. Thanks, Aaron. And then one last comment. regarding kind of the proposed increased incentive amount for those in disadvantaged communities, definitely want to uplift that, and something that, as Chris from Coalition for Clean Air mentioned, for greenlining, for CCA, for Charge Ahead Coalition, we want to see the increased focus on getting more incentives into disadvantaged community census tracts, low-income households in disadvantaged community census tracts. As we've looked at some of the data, some of the incentives have been going to zip codes, obviously around there, or to low-income households in other areas. But we want to make sure that we're prioritizing our most impacted and frontline communities. And so appreciate that increased incentive amount. And a question for you all is whether there's going to be some prioritization around these incentives to those in census tracts. I know in the need-based approach later on, there's going to be a discussion of prioritizing those applications that are coming from DAC applicants, and having that be the first applications that are reviewed. But I'm curious if for the statewide Clean Cars for All, like that is also what's being considered.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you kind of jumped ahead there. I mean, I think looking at the needs-based implementation, there is going to be there is going to be some prioritization to those that need, the funding the most, for the statewide program. So I think that's a kind of a segue. I think we have another raised hand, but yes, there is going to be, a needs-based implementation for statewide, and there, that prioritization will be considered.
Okay, thanks, Aaron.
Sure, thank you.
Next up, we have Tim Tyner. Tim, I've unmuted your mic.
Tim Tyner, Central California Asthma Collaborative. I want to agree with most folks and commend CARB staff for responding to a lot of the requests to increase the rebates for lower income communities. I also agree with Chris and Roman that we do want to continue to track the funding is going to DACs as we open up Clean Cars for All to non-disadvantaged communities. We totally support lower income families in non-disadvantaged communities should be eligible, but we too don't want to see any backsliding of where the resources are going. I would like to see, seeing these numbers now, I'm really curious to see what John's analysis of affordability would look like with these changes in the incentives. And, CSE could put something together with these increases and incorporating some of the comments that Brett and others made about some real world scenarios about costs and other things. And if there's a way to bring, the federal rebate into this for those who are in those income levels, it's hard for us to educate some of the residents about how the federal rebate and how the changes might impact them, not knowing their liability and not knowing in 2024 if the rebate can go to the dealer, is it going to matter what their liability is? And I think, lastly, my only concern, and again, I'm really pleased to see these increases. I think my only concern, and this goes back to John's presentation, is we saw the 400% FPL group really didn't have affordability for any new battery electric or plug-in hybrids. And yet we're decreasing the incentives for that group. So between 300 and 400%. And, I'm happy that you collapsed down to a single 300% FPL. I think, again, we wanted to see simplification. We wanted to see alignment. So I'm happy about that. I think it makes sense. I'm glad the increased rebates for CVRP is staying at 400% because at least there's that $7,500 for people in that bracket. But my worry is, again, based on John's presentation, that we're decreasing the incentive for that income level. We're providing no incentives for scrapping. We're providing no incentives for used vehicles. And I think we're going to see a lot less of that group. And that still is a low income group in most places, 400%. I don't have a solution. I don't know how to fix that, but that would be my only concern from the new incentives.
Thank you for your comments, Tim. In terms of the modeling, yeah, it definitely, we can go back and make some adjustments there based on what this proposal looks like, as well as folding in the new federal incentives with the Inflation Reduction Act and how that's going to impact vehicles. I think we're still trying to wrap our heads around that and what vehicles are going to be eligible and how, when that might be realized, as well as the federal used EV incentive that will be coming to the market soon. And so those are definitely things we are taking into consideration and what we can include in the modeling going forward. And I'll turn it over to Aaron to follow up on the other comments.
Yeah, Tim, I appreciate your comments. I think what we've tried to do with this proposal is really balance a very, very limited budget with getting funding to those that need it the most. And so, I think what we need is, quite frankly, we need the legislature to give us more money. And, we've had to really strike that balance with the need for increased incentive amounts with, these, lowering these income tiers and making sure that it is a needs-based program and making sure that the amounts per vehicle is enough to get those in most need into the newer vehicles. So we definitely appreciate your comment. I just wanted to touch on that. I mean, we've really had to strike that balance given the the budget and how much it was slashed and just in general the limited amount of funding going to these programs. So we really want to make sure we're focusing on lowest income disadvantaged communities. So definitely hear you, appreciate your comment, but I just wanted to kind of provide some context on how we approached how we were approaching this proposal.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, Aaron. I think we are all expecting more money from this that would perhaps allow the opportunity to continue to fund this other income level. And I can't disagree with the approach. We've been advocating to bring as much resources to the lower income group. This proposal does that. So, not everyone is going to win with the funding we have, but maybe we can keep looking for opportunities when available to find ways to support the 300 to 400% FPL group.
Thank you, Tim.
There are no more raised hands.
Again, we know this is the first time you guys are seeing this proposal. So towards the end of the presentation, you'll see we've left contact information for staff. If you want to follow up offline, we will also be bringing this proposal next week to our workshop. So there'll be additional time for you to provide input. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Ali Kwistani to go over the next agenda item.
Thank you, Raquel. I know that there has been a lot of numbers and great conversations over multiple pieces of our programs. And now this is the time that we are going to talk about the model that we are going to implement this year for taking all these incentives to low-income consumers with the goal that we are hoping to maximize our efforts to put the consumers who need these incentives the most get the priority. With that, at this point of the presentation, I'm going to touch on the final needs-based model that we will be adopting in our equity-focused vehicle purchase incentives program this year. As you know, last year, board approved our proposal to depart from first come, first serve model and transition to a need-based model where we can better target and serve our low-income consumers. Piloting financing assistance project on their two programs with slightly different approaches for a few years provided us that low-income consumers need more time and support to complete application processes and purchase a clean vehicle. Due to the high demand and limited available funds, we faced program closures multiple times. That was unfortunate, but we realized that oftentimes these consumers who need these incentives the most were left behind and couldn't benefit from what we had to offer. With the needs-based model, where applicants are going to be prioritized based on their needs, we aim to distribute our limited funds more equitably. The model is designed around the common criteria of very low-income consumers to better target and provide additional support and assistance throughout the process, from application to financing and purchasing the vehicle. With adoption of this model and intentional targeting on those who need incentives the most, we aim to keep the program open year-round and ensure funding is available when they are ready to make the purchase. We propose multiple criteria, and after working with stakeholders and taking your feedback into consideration, the needs-based model is framed with 4 major criteria. Number 1 is living in disadvantaged or low-income communities, having annual income less than 225% of federal poverty level, and participation and eligibility in other state low-income programs such as Medicaid, SSI, CAPI, CalWORKs, HOT, Section 8, and potentially others are another one. And lastly, those who need financial counseling or help to improve their credit scores to become eligible for benefiting from equitable loans that we offer through the project financing assistance, and those are the guaranteed loans. These are the major common criteria we observed through multiple years that impacted those who were left behind. And we plan to minimize these impacts and make sure that our funds are distributed equitably. How the needs-based model will be implemented. This infographic is the general framework that our policies help direct and for the implementation of the model. Based on the multiple rounds of conversations and your feedbacks, the model would be like a 3-lane highway that right at the gate and entrance, any application that lives in disadvantaged or low-income communities will be flagged as priority 1. They automatically fall into tier 1, which means applicants processing starts immediately to ensure if the applicant needs help with providing documents, financial or vehicle technology education, or any other steps of the process, get the proper help sooner through case management team. Based on the findings of the case management step, funds will be reserved for a reasonable amount of time to ensure that it's available when the consumer is at the finish line. For example, if a consumer with bad credit score living in a disadvantaged community is coming and automatically falls on into tier 1, the case management, as soon as they identify that there is a need for additional time to fix the credit score, to increase that and make consumer eligible for benefiting from low interest loans, immediately as resources will be allocated to make sure that consumers has enough resources and support to get into the finish line in a timely manner. If an applicant does not meet above mentioned criteria, but has an income less than 225% of FPL or is eligible for other state low-income programs mentioned before, it will fall under tier 2. This means that application will be processed expeditiously, but after tier 1, and the goal is up to maximum 3 days. The third lane or tier is for those who are only low income and do not meet eligibility criteria, but over the general rules of the program, they are eligible. And they do not meet the criteria for tier 1 and 2. The goal is just around 30 to 40 days, we can process their application with a proper resource allocation. We believe that assorting applicants with these measures will help us to attend to those who are in most need quickly and allocate resources effectively and efficiently with the goal that everyone has an equal opportunity to access incentives. I should mention that in the case program exhausts funding quickly, such that program closure is forthcoming. Tier 3 and subsequently Tier 2 will be closed first, with the goal to keep the funds available for Tier 1 applicants year-round. Lastly, we will use the most recent CAD virus screen to determine the disadvantaged or low-income community residency. With that, I will open it up for questions and comments from our attendees. Please use the raise hand function if you would like to ask a question or comment. If you're calling by phone, please press #2. Please state your name and affiliation before asking a question or making a comment. I would like to mention that at the end, if time permits, we are going to have more time for general questions if needed.
Thank you, Ali. First up, we have Laura Renger. Laura, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi, Laura Renger, Cali TC. This was really helpful. Thank you. And I just want to thank staff for all of this information, the transparency. It's just been really informative today. But really quickly, will this new process apply to all the equity purchase incentive programs? So Clean Cars for All, CVRP, and the Financing Assistance Program?
Yes. As my colleagues previously mentioned, that our goals into bringing all these kind of programs closer and closer together is making it very simple for consumers, aligning as much as we can, and integration. So with the joint solicitation for statewide Clean Cars for All and financing assistance, we are taking a big step just to consolidate the processing for these two program application processing. And with the rebate now expansion, we are hoping that consumers who are coming to either statewide Clean Cars for All or financing assistance, they can basically go through one application process, and with the coordination with rebate now, everybody, all those applicants are going to get, for low-income consumers, they are going to get what the stagnant incentives is there to be offered at the point of purchase.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your comment.
Next up, we have Chris Chavez. Chris, I've unmuted your mic.
Great. Thank you once again, Chris Chavez, Coalition for Clean Air. Regarding the needs-based application, certainly, understand and appreciate CARB's intent with this. I think one thing certainly we want to make sure to avoid, however, is situations where the program becomes more difficult to administer. So certainly, CARB should be mindful of that as it's developing the process. I know in our conversations with CARB as well, CARB staff as well, that the part of the process is going to be designed with the whoever is selected as the statewide administrator of the program. I would certainly encourage and urge CARB and the administrator that as you're designing that needs-based process, that it's done, that development process is done publicly with community and stakeholder input. Particularly, I think the two important folks to reach out to and work with are, one, the people or the organizations that are currently running and administering the program, learning what's worked well, what can be improved, other just some of the lessons learned over the last however many years that Clean Cars for All has been around. But most importantly, also with the folks who are actually going to benefit from this program and the disadvantaged communities and their community-based organizations or representatives who interface with those areas on a daily basis, just to get kind of idea of what's happening on the ground and what their needs are, and what this application process, how that application process can address those needs. So I think this is moving in the right direction. Just want to provide that feedback as CARB moves forward in developing the needs-based application process.
Thank you, Chris. Definitely. We are working with CBOs, grassroots organizations, just to make sure that outreach education messages of these programs being conveyed to respective communities is a key component that we have had in mind designing this model. And just like before for CVRP and financing assistance, because these are the two programs that I've been working on, we held multiple workgroup meetings focusing on implementation of these programs to seek feedback from stakeholders so we can take all those into consideration in designing an implementation. But I have to mention that this is something that we need to do in with help of the program administrator. So this is definitely in our timeline. Once we have the joint solicitation out there, selecting the program administrator, we are going to keep multiple public processes to bring you guys proposals and get your feedback and fine tune our implementation plan. Definitely, we are going to do that.
Thank you. Next up, we have Tareya McCumber. Tareya, I've unmuted your mic.
Well, thank you. This is Tareya McCumber. I use she, her pronouns. I'm Director of Clean Mobility Programs at Grid Alternatives and Director of Access Clean California. I think it was Chris who was just speaking right before me. And I wanted to say great thought and comment and suggestion. I will say that Ali and Lisa, as well as Grace, have all come to the Access Clean California monthly outreach partner meeting, I think a couple of times now, and the outreach partner monthly meeting is a meeting that Access facilitates every month for our 22 outreach partners that are a part of the Access Clean California network. They workshop this directly with a group of community-based organizations, as well as grassroots and grass tops organizations as well. So I will say that Ali and the team has connected. And then second thing is, Access Clean California started in 2018, and the first thing we did was kind of a pre-pandemic when you could just kind of travel a little bit, but we did do a really neat thing visiting with each program administrator out of CARB and really trying to understand the nuances of each application process, because one of our requirements is trying to figure out how to reduce barriers for applications, but also try to start centralizing the application. So a lot of this work has been done, and we're just excited to see it actually being operationalized. So I'm just excited listening to all of these amazing proposals that you all have. Thank you.
Thank you, Tareya, and thank you for all your cooperation, supports, and constructive feedbacks and opportunities for us to come to your events and benefiting from yours and outreach partners' feedback. Thank you.
Next up, we have Roman. Roman, I have unmuted your mic.
Thanks, Aria. Yeah, Roman Partia Lopez of the Green Lining Institute. Yeah, thanks, Ali, for this overview. This is helpful. Want to uplift CARB's work on this, and again, trying to be responsive to feedback that Green Lining and the Charger Head Coalition has provided in the past. Just a couple of thoughts and a couple of questions, but I think first off, again, I appreciate this move to a need-based approach. I think it's one that we've been supportive of and want to see want to see implemented, right? To ensure that those that are most in need have access to these incentives. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, we continue to see a gap, right? Especially from low income households that live in disadvantaged community census tracts. And even though I think this is definitely a move in that direction to a need-based approach, just looking at this 3-lane highway approach that you have in front of us, I still feel a little bit like we're not quite there yet. And in part, I feel like it's still somewhat of a first come, first serve process, because you're receiving all the applications at once and then prioritizing based on, these different criterias that are there. I think if we really want to be intentional and develop a true need-based approach that is centering equity and delivering equity outcomes, it's not just about creating equal opportunities, as you mentioned, right? You mentioned you want everyone to have equal opportunity access to incentives. It means really prioritizing those with the biggest barriers, those that, we want to make sure that are receiving incentives. And, there's probably some more information on like how the 3-lane approach will get prioritized and how they will be held off and all of that. But I think we need to get to that level of detail, right? I think one of the things we had suggested was, yes, a phased approach, right? But one that really starts and says, right, for right now, we're focusing in on disadvantaged and low income households in disadvantaged community census tracts. And then once that's maximized, then we kind of work our way out, right? So, and that starts feeling more like a need-based approach rather than one that what we have here. I mean, what we have here is moving in that direction, right? But I think we could definitely be more intentional. And I think, just from my previous comments, I hear what you're saying about some of this has to be addressed or resolved once we have an administrator. And I keep hearing that, and I want to continue to push back on that, because I feel like we need to resolve all of these policy related recommendations now, rather than once we have an administrator. Because once we move to have an administrator, a lot of that happens behind closed doors. It doesn't happen in this public, transparent process. So I really want to start avoiding that. And if we could solve that now and have that be what the eventual administrator is responding to, then we have a scope of work that is really reflective of what folks want to see from this type of need-based approach, rather than one that's then addressed behind closed doors, or that doesn't have additional input to really build out in a way to ensure that we are reaching the folks that we need to reach. So again, I want to really continue to push back on that. And I know y'all want to release a joint solicitation to bring on that administrator, but I think we still have to solve these policy questions before we move to that process. And then my question here is, because you will be potentially joining these two programs, Clean Cars for All and CVAP, which definitely have some overlap, but also have some differences. In regards to funding breakdown within this statewide or within this joint program now, will there be a breakdown? Will there be a certain amount of funds allocated to the statewide Clean Cars for All and the rest for CVAP? Or will it kind of just be, again, on a first come, first serve, and whichever applications are received, depending on the criteria that you've laid out here, that's sort of what will be funded?
Thank you for comments, Roman. With respect to implementation, we have had in the past multiple public processes developing our implementation design through public settings. We brought proposals, took your feedback, and we have implementation manuals that we shared with public, with stakeholders, and sought feedback. And we intend to do so moving forward. There are certain aspects of the program implementation that we have to rely on a program administrator. There are certain expertise and support that we just solely rely on our program administrator. Without them being on board, we cannot get to the point that we have a proposal to put forward so we can have a public work group and discuss over that. This is going to happen once we have the joint solicitation and have a program administrator in place. These are all framework, high-level policies that we are going to move into that direction. With respect to your first comment on the still, this is more like a first come, first serve. Unless we just minimize or change the eligibility of the program to disadvantaged community, there is no other way that we can. It's all about having low-income consumers within disadvantaged communities and low-income communities and out of these. The program goal has been always to help low-income applicants. But we recognize, and as we proposed additional other $2,000 for those who are residing in disadvantaged community, focusing more on outreach and education in disadvantaged communities. And on the end, from the implementation perspective, we are setting the system up such that all those who are coming from disadvantaged communities get the first attention. Is the best that we can do at this point to make sure that nobody is left behind with the priority given to the disadvantaged communities.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Ali, and I appreciate that. And again, the public process you all have provided is definitely one that has been helpful. And again, there's still some remaining questions, at least for my end, that need to be addressed, right, before we can move this forward. I think to your point about needing an administrator to be on board to help resolve some of these policy questions, again, I'm going to continue to push back on this, because for your other equity specific projects that are community focused, right, they don't get that flexibility, right? STEP, the Sustainable Transportation Equity Pilot Program, or Clean Mobility Options, or all those other ones, there's clear guidelines that they have, right, that they have to meet, and they're responding to that to then be able to provide that need and that solution to their community. So what I'm asking is so for this process to kind of reflect that, right? If we're putting that level of that type of requirement on community organizations who are coming together to submit proposals that are very specific, right here, I think we need to start moving in that direction, right? So that we're all clear on exactly what that administrator is going to respond to, and not just allowing that to happen again afterwards, right? Unless you all then start developing a process where it's clear of what they're doing, what their proposal, not just what their proposal was, but what they're going to do to address those policy questions through a public process, right? Rather than reporting on it at the end of the year or at some other time. I think, I'm just really trying to ensure that we're creating transparency and procedural equity in this process, because there's been a lot of questions over the last few months around these issues, and whatever we can do to clear up or provide more transparency, I'm hoping that we can that we can start doing. And I think one of those is having these policy questions answered before getting an administrator, and then allowing those decisions to happen outside of this public process.
So maybe some of your questions will be answered in the next 2-3 weeks that we are going to have another work group meeting with respect to joint solicitation that we are going to put out. But as I have mentioned in previous work group meetings for the solicitation, one of the criteria that we are considering this time around for any application coming our way is that program administrators needs to make sure that CBOs, grassroots organizations, all these kind of stakeholders, that they are in front line working with their communities, are in their program. They have to put forward a solid proposal that they have a plan to work with them. And I assume that as soon as we have the program administrator in place and their proposal is coming to us and subsequently to you guys, with working with community-based organizations, having their feedback and input in that. So, but would be happy to follow up with you more on a specific, and you're more than welcome to just give us more feedback how you would like us to design the implementation of this program. We recognize that this is going to be very complicated. And we are trying to bring on board as many as players who are working in this area. So collectively, we can lift up this heavy weight.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and then lastly, just a question around breakdown of funding amounts.
No, so the way that it is going to work, when an applicant is coming to the program or putting the application forward, there's going to be one simple question: if they have a car to scrap or no. If they have, they'll go through the CC4A, the statewide CC4A program. And if not, they go through the financing system program. And although these programs are going to be run under one program administrators, funds and counting and everything, when it comes to fund allocation and incentive allocation, is going to be handled separate.
Got it. So then it's not going to be a scenario where 50% of the funds are dedicated to statewide clean cars for all, and 50% of the funds are going to go to
No, not at all.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Next up, we have Brett. Brett, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you, Arya, and thank you, Ali, and everyone else for the presentations today. I'm Brett Zuner with the Foundation for California Community Colleges, and yeah, just want to plus one what Chris and Taria and Roman have all said, and especially I guess the point around, well, I guess it's not plus oneing it in a way, because pushing back on the making it too complicated for the administrator, I think there needs to be that fine balance, because I think it's okay to ask administrators to do more and to have a more hands-on process and do deeper case management that it might be more complicated. And finding that balance and just making sure that CARB, if that's what CARB is saying, like, we want, that's what the state says we want to do, making sure that there's funding there for that, so that administrators can hire enough case managers, that the case managers staff makes a livable wage and is able to get paid, yeah, just to live a dignified life doing that work and helping others get vehicles and or non-vehicles, just getting access to mobility in general. And I think that's already happening. And so I just want to emphasize, though, I don't think it's a negative thing to add to the program requirement, well, not the program requirements, but for the administrators and case managers to complicate their process a little bit, because we know that would make it better for the consumer. So not making it complicated for the applicant and residents, but yeah, just believing in our case management staff that they can do it, and they can support folks as long as we're supporting them and we have the means and resources to do so. And I guess with that, I just raised that I had a similar thought to Roman about the the different tracks or the 3 lanes, so to speak, but that it does seem like it is still a little first come first serve, like within the 3 lanes a bit. And I guess in my mind, way back when we started talking about the needs-based model, in my mind, I envisioned, we've heard stories about folks who it's a single parent household and they have one vehicle that they rely on to get their kids to go to school, to meet healthcare appointments and make money. We've heard people talk about how folks now rely on income from DoorDash or other vehicle related delivery services or ride sharing. If somebody in that situation were to lose a vehicle, they're going to need a vehicle right away. And if we're not able to meet that demand and meet that need, those folks will probably go out and get a, used older internal combustion vehicle out of just dire necessity. And so to emphasize that point, I wonder, I think what we talked about today was needs-based, but still a very quantitative methodology, which I think why I started with the comment about case management capacity. I think the quantitative method of determining a need and doing needs-based approaches makes sense when we want to limit the burden, quote unquote, on case management and administrators. But I think at the end of the day, we eventually have to grapple with the fact that need shows up in so many different ways. And if we truly want to have a needs-based model, we're going to have to get our hands a little bit dirty in the context of qualitative, case by case. And I would love to see, I know that kind of already happens in programs, but I would love to see that really uplifted and that we speak more openly about it and bring that conversation to communities, like Roman was saying, and others have said, to talk to folks to be able to, somebody comes to this program, they only have one car in the household and they lost that car, or they got in an accident and they're looking for, because, if somebody gets in an accident, they have to get a new car and they're low income, they're going to get some money for that. They have to spend that within X amount of days, or the insurance company, they get in trouble with that. How can we help folks then get a more reliable, better for the environment car, better for their pocketbook car? And I don't know that this needs-based approach will address that. And maybe I'm missing something, but I guess I'm just wondering, like, is there thought about the more granular, like those qualitative, like case-by-case moments? And is there the idea that we would give that discretion to administrators and that we would, give enough capacity to administrators to be able to deal with those case-by-case moments? Because I do think that would really define in my eyes and others what needs-based approach means. So thank you.
Thank you, Brett. Appreciate your comments. Yes, we are going to do that. And actually in the past iteration of this needs-based model that we have been working, one of the criteria that we proposed was that referrals through CBOs, those cases and instances that you mentioned, unfortunately, it is going to be very burdensome for program administrators to handle. Already is going to be a higher price tag for program implementation with the needs-based model and case management, the level of case management that we are going to provide. That's what we are hoping to rely on CBOs when they are on board and working closely with program administrators, so we can create some kind of qualitative channel, quantitative measures that CBOs do the qualitative assessments and refer them to program administrators that put them in such a position that they can benefit from stakeholders. And I assume that this is going to be on our list for once we launch the program. These are the level of details that we can work with CBOs and other stakeholders with respect to fine-tuning the implementation program. And definitely we are going to do that. Looking forward to your comments and feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Jonathan Changus. Jonathan, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to comment. And I think this is a really critical issue, and it is it's complex, and it's, as we're hearing, incredibly relevant. So appreciate the work that's been put into this by both CARB as well as stakeholders trying to advance the conversation where we're at. It does feel like there's still more work, as we've all noted, kind of going forward. I had kind of a couple of questions and comments. The first was, one of the concerns, it sounds like, is that the current program designs with first come, first served, the money's there and then the money's gone. And if you were able to participate, fantastic for you, but others that may need additional assistance or may need longer time are left out. First question is, in the past, to avoid recognizing that, CVRP had a specific set aside of funding that was specific for the low-income communities to get the increased rebate. And that funding was a separate pot that, and we saw multiple times where the standard rebate would run out of funding, but there was still funding for low-income communities throughout until the next appropriation. I was wondering if that idea of making sure we're setting aside funding for those high priority, the tiers as you've identified them, was a consideration is the first piece. And then the second one is in thinking about more qualitative or subjective criteria is trying to really understand the verification piece of that, in which it will absolutely help folks that have more unique circumstances get through, but we've also seen it creates potentially a lot of opportunity for others that aren't the intended audience to take advantage of a more subjective process. And so what would be the parameters? And this is more of a question. I'm not discounting the role and value. I'm just seeking more information from folks that are supportive of the more qualitative pieces. What are the checks and balances that go into that to make sure that folks who aren't the intended audience don't try and take advantage of it, especially since we're talking about much larger sums of money? What would be some of the components? And maybe the answer there is the quantitative values are those checks. Those are still important, and it's additional components that really help us identify on a case-by-case basis who makes more sense. And then the other question there is, how do we reconcile? Is it more important to have that more intentional case-by-case in a longer timeline from when someone applies to when they would receive the application or the award approval? Or is it to move expeditiously on the award approval and balancing out those needs and interests? Because it seems like if we're going on a deeper dive on a case-by-case basis that necessarily involves process and time, that wouldn't move as expeditiously. And I'm curious from folks that work especially more closely directly with the community if, yes, additional time to help those in greater need is more important as a rule of thumb than a general expedited process across the board. That feels like a pretty significant policy check. And so just hoping to hear more from both CARB and stakeholders on those issues.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, this has always been a concern that, for example, recently we have seen multiple cases of folks taking advantage of financing assistance incentives and purchasing by the program rules that we tend to keep very simple and make it simple very for consumers. They are purchasing over $100,000 vehicles. That's why we are going to put MSRP cap or purchase price cap. And in addition to that, other measures to make sure that these limited dollars are for those who need them the most. And again, I can't say it enough that how much we are banking on working with CBOs, those community members, to help us create an implementation plan or design the implementation program to make sure that they get what they need and they deserve.
Thank you. Next up, we have Tim Tyner. Tim, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you. Tim Tyner, Central California Asthma Collaborative. Yeah, there have been a lot of great points. I don't want to reiterate what everyone has said. Ali, I'm really happy to hear you emphasizing the role of the CBOs. I know other folks have said CBOs should have input into the process. We firmly believe CBOs need to be a part of the process. CBOs can be your case managers. But we also, and I've said this too many times before already, CBOs can't be put in the position of having to review qualitative criteria that will become subjective. And, it's sort of, well, the CBOs should know if this person is really needs-based. So we're much more supportive of something that is measurable, it's verifiable. And I know it's not ideal because there are going to be cases maybe that are higher priority that we're not capturing as the highest priority, but there has to be a practical aspect to this. It has to be implementable. Your tiers, the idea of having expedited applications, kind of agree with that, but at the same time, I think whoever the administrator is, and I think this should apply to the air district programs too, there shouldn't be a process that takes more than 30 days. I mean, everything should be able to be processed in a timely manner so no one is waiting 2 or 3 or 6 months for an application. And again, that serves everybody, whether it's somebody who has been looking for a while or it's a rideshare person who needs their car right away. You know, it should work for anyone the same way. I did have a question about when you said that the needs-based model will apply to all 3 equity-focused programs. Does that include Air District administered programs? So it's going to be across the board, all the CARB-funded equity programs follow the same needs-based model?
That is the goal. Thank you, Tim, for your comments. Yes, that's the goal. But, you know, at this point, we are starting from financing assistance statewide clean cars for all, with the hope that soon that we can align and integrate with rebate now for CVRP, and eventually hope that we can have a system in place that all incentives at the state level would be integrated in such that make it super simple for consumers. Basically, what we are doing and hoping to do is just all those complications, multiple applications from consumers and to program ends, and integrate everything as much as we can here. That's the ultimate goal, to bring districts as well into the mix.
Yeah, and again, we very appreciative of how responsive CARB has been to a lot of these requests to try to align the programs, make it simpler and more accessible to lower income residents. Your example of someone starting the application because they have a car to scrap, so it starts through CC4A, and then they may end up using finance assistance. They may qualify for increased rebate because they're looking for a new vehicle. That works great for the statewide programs. A lot of these residents, though, live in air districts that administer programs. If it starts with the air district CC4A, is it then a completely separate process to work through financing assistance or CVRP increased rebate, or is there going to be coordination? And I know the goal is for there to be coordination, but is there anything in what's coming out of CARB that's going to actually make it happen sooner than later to where it is one process regardless of where you live?
Hey, Tim, I'd like to jump in here. I think, you know, as Ollie mentioned, that's the ultimate goal. These programs, particularly, you know, Clean Cars for All, financing assistance, are very complicated. We have several air district programs. We're proposing a statewide program. We've got to, with the implementation of these things, is very complicated. And as Ollie mentioned, the ultimate goal is complete program alignment in the interest of having simplicity for those that are applying to these programs. With the various moving pieces we have right now, you know, we feel like this proposal, the needs-based proposal, the joint solicitation with financial assistance and Clean Cars for All statewide is the first step in moving in that direction. There are so many things that we have to work through, you know, as we develop implementation manuals to look to streamline the program. So, you know, again, we feel like this is a good first step moving in that direction, but there's still a lot of things that we need to work through in terms of, you know, getting to that ultimate goal. And so, you know, again, we welcome input, great comments that we're hearing today. As we move into the phase of, you know, again, developing these implementation manuals, we can get more details on how to streamline these programs. So appreciate your comments. And again, yeah, I mean, I think that's really what I wanted to say is that there's a lot that we have to do to get to that ultimate goal of program alignment. And we just really feel that this proposal is a real good step in the right direction.
Right. Okay. This is my last question, and it may be too soon to ask this, but does SB 1230 do anything to accelerate the process you're talking about, Aaron? Or is it going to do anything to change all the plans we've sort of been talking about? Or is this something that will be discussed over the next year and maybe we'll see the impacts of that legislation in 2024?
I think it's more the latter. There's more to come on that. And I think there's a number of, again, implementation challenges that we face in implementing implementing that legislation. And so I think there's more conversation to come on that. But again, looking at the current proposal, we really feel like we're headed in the right direction to that ultimate alignment of these programs. So just really want to reiterate that.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate everyone's time today.
Thank you, Tim, for your comments.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. So we have time for one more comment. Brett, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up, I guess, on what was said and kind of respond to John and others. But I just wanted to point out that, there has been, I guess, what we would call fraud or abuse of the programs to date. And, you can just go on Reddit and search how to get a Tesla CVAP or how to get a Tesla CVRP and read all the threads about how people help each other out, like, oh, tell them this, do that, et cetera, et cetera. So we know how they do it, how they've been doing it, and that's been through quote unquote measurable and quantitative methods. So there's already been abuse of the programs with what we've been doing. So I don't think it's fair to say that a qualitative or quote unquote subjective approach would yield any more abuse of the program than we've already seen with quantitative. I think there's a bias in this country, in the world, really, that qualitative is inferior to quantitative, or that, if you have this number there, that somehow that will protect us. And we've seen that it won't. And we've seen abuse of the programs. And I think at the deepest core there's just trust and relationships in case management. And I think something that I've spoke with my team about for Replace or Ride is viewing folks as people and seeing applicants as people and trying to develop a relationship as best you can, and getting to know your folks. I mean, granted, we don't have that much time with them and you need to keep things moving. I think that's where the CBOs helping with intake or helping with that first touch outreach is so important, because it is really about relationship building and trust building with communities. And we know that there's bottlenecks at income verification, working with the DMV. I know we all love the DMV. It's my favorite place to go. And, vehicle records, getting those, that can take weeks to months to deal with IRS and DMV, our two favorite public entities. Those are being addressed right now. I know there's a lot of momentum around income verification. I think we have a long way to go around streamlining vehicle record verification and taking that burden off of the applicant and doing that at a higher scale. But doing those things would open up the ability for case management to address things on a more granular level as needed. And there are ways to verify people's stories. I think we need to be careful about forcing people to just prove, their trauma. But we do, at the end of the day, as people have pointed out, need something to fall back on. But if somebody's saying that, their car got totaled and they only own one car, all you need is the insurance letter from their insurance provider that shows total loss of vehicle, and it matches that, yes, this household has one vehicle per the DMV. That's pretty solid proof, I would say. And so there are ways to verify those situations. Also, when we work with people and check income, you can see their pay stub, you can see where they work. You can see that they do work for Uber or Lyft or DoorDash, and that's their main source of income. And we do see that they just lost their car. Put two and two together, this person's in a very dire situation. I don't think that that's too much to ask of our case managers and program administrators, and I think it is necessary. So I think, we just have to really be honest about what it is that we want to accomplish with the program changes. And if we want to help those really most in need people arguably in crisis sometimes, I think that we should definitely have, the emergency lane. So use the highway example, there needs to be this emergency lane for people to advance and get cars immediately when they need them, because we do have people whose livelihood literally depends on access to their vehicle. So thank you so much. I really look forward to this process rolling out and engaging with everyone on this call, because I think we have the potential to really change things for the better working all together. So thank you.
Thank you, Brett.
There are no more raised hands. So Raquel, if you want to take it away.
Yep, thank you. And thank you everyone for your questions and comments today. It's been very helpful. You know, I'm gonna spend the last few minutes going over some next steps before we close here today. As we've mentioned, a third public workshop for the fiscal year 2022-23 funding plan for clean transportation incentives will be held next Thursday, September 8th from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Again, another opportunity for stakeholders to provide public comment on our proposals, and we will go into greater detail on budget then. Staff will then incorporate stakeholder feedback into our final proposals, which will be included in the final funding plan. That will be posted this October and heard before the board in November. Again, if you have any additional questions or would like to meet offline to discuss what we've covered today, please do not hesitate to reach out to lead staff. We've included their emails here. We are more than happy to meet. Again, thank you everyone who presented as well as those who participated today. It's been a great conversation and we look forward to continue working with you as we finalize this.